As I mentioned, we're coming up to a 5-minute news bulletin, and then after that we'll have much more news on the way throughout the day. Please do stay tuned, and we'll bring you much more news after that. It's news time.
Helen Zaremis with ABC News. Intelligence and security researchers say the federal government's move to evict Russia from its new embassy site near Parliament House in Canberra is commensurate with the restraints placed on Australian officials in Moscow. The Prime Minister says the move has the support of the entire Parliament and comes after the federal court ruled in favour of Russia over its dispute with the National Capital Authority. International Security and Intelligence Studies Professor John Blaxland says Russia already has a substantial presence in Canberra with its existing embassy, which is nearby.
They were going to have that, hold that, and build a new one next to the Chinese embassy, just in line from the Telstra tower between Telstra and Parliament House. What could possibly go wrong?
Victoria's police associations confirm some stations are closing at night so officers can tackle youth offending. Its secretary Wayne Gatt concedes the closures aren't an acceptable level of service for a 24-hour police station, but says the sector's also dealing with a high number of vacancies and officers on long-term mental health leave. Mr Gatt says youth crime has been an emerging issue for years and the nature of the crimes have become increasingly violent.
You have to look a bit deeper than just this is a law and order issue. This is a social issue. What are the drivers behind youth offending? What are the drivers behind crime more broadly, but particularly with young people?
Work will soon begin on a new renewable energy hub in outback Queensland after it receives $7 million in funding in the state's budget. Dan Prosser reports.
Barcaldin's renewable energy zone is expected to draw new businesses to the region, including protected horticulture and waste energy. Deputy Premier Stephen Miles says there's potential for produce to be shipped all over the country and world.
A new model for how we can deliver investment and development into all of our regional towns.
Barcaldine Regional Council's mayor says the net zero emissions model will save businesses money.
One business's waste product is another business's input. That then adds a second layer of assistance to ensure the financial viability.
Work is expected to commence in the next few months.
In New South Wales, the Mayor of Lismore says the state government's let down his community as it recovers from last year's floods. This week, the Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation released its flood hazard mapping and revised down the number of houses eligible for a buyback from 2,000 to 1,100. Mayor Steve Krieg says it's the biggest disappointment since the floods in Lismore 16 months ago.
I will never give up fighting for my community for what was promised to us post-flood. And there are so many people that were shocked and hurt and lost all hope in the release of these flood maps.
A search is continuing for a man who's been missing in waters off Newcastle, north of Sydney. The search began last night when the man didn't return home as planned after taking his boat out off Bolton Point. Polair Marine Area Command and Marine Rescue and the Regent's rescue helicopter.
I think it allows the economy a little more time to adapt as we make our decisions going forward.
But he's also warned that while inflation has eased in the United States, it's still too high. And the Fed has flagged it could raise interest rates twice more before the end of this year in an attempt to drive inflation down.
Canada is freezing ties with the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank while it probes allegations it's closely linked to the Chinese Communist Party. Canada's Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, says she hasn't ruled out any outcome of the investigation, suggesting the government could pull out of a bank if it officially joined in 2018. And another key ingredient for life has apparently been discovered on one of Saturn's moons. Scientists say high concentrations of an essential element for all biological processes on Earth have been detected in ice crystals spewed from the interior ocean of Enceladus. Researchers say the discovery of phosphorus adds to the moon's potential to harbour life. ABC News.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Good morning, I'm Dale Drinkwater. Coming up, free trade talks between Australia and the European Union lose momentum.
We've managed to get those negotiations back on track, but I can't say that they've been easy. The Europeans are negotiating very hard.
And Byron Bay limits short stay rentals in an attempt to curb the housing crisis. But first, federal police have stopped more than $1.5 billion worth of methamphetamine hitting the streets in one of the nation's largest ever drug busts. The AFP says 6 tonnes of the drug had been hidden in canola oil bottles. Reporter Christian Silva has the details.
Yesterday was the culmination of a 6-month investigation involving the Australian Federal Police, Canadian Police and a whole bunch of other law enforcement agencies. And yesterday in Melbourne, there were 6 men who were arrested, including 2 men who are perceived as the so-called ringleaders of this group, the Australian-based ringleaders of this group. So taking you back to what this story is all about. Well, police say that there was about 6 tonnes of methamphetamine that was attempted to be smuggled into Australia in canola oil bottles that were being shipped into the country from Canada. Investigators seized 4 consignments. One actually made it to Australia and was tracked all the way by police. The others were intercepted in Canada. Several arrests were made yesterday, and now these men will face court. Police say this is a very significant drug bust. It ranks as one of the biggest in the country's history, and it really follows a series of similar major drug busts made by police over the last 12 months. About $1 billion of cocaine was seized in WA earlier this year. And last year in Sydney, a similar amount, about $1.7 billion of drugs was found hidden in a shipment. This morning, federal police are expected to hold a media conference where they'll provide more details about this investigation. There is still a lot that we don't know. We know that these shipments were coming from Canada, but as to who was behind it remains a mystery at this stage. So that's definitely something that we're hoping to get some answers about, who was behind all of this and how far up it goes. In terms of the court process, as I mentioned, 6 men have been charged. Some of them faced court in Melbourne last night. Others are due to face court today and in the coming days. So that will be part of this investigation. And Karina, the 2 men who are supposedly the top figures in Australia, they've been charged with very serious drug offences that carry a maximum penalty of life in prison.
That's reporter Christian Silva speaking there about the $500 million worth of methamphetamine, which was intercepted by the Australian Federal Police. And to other issues now, a free trade agreement with Europe would give Australian exporters better access to $1 trillion market, much needed in the years since the trade relationship with China has deteriorated. Australia is an enthusiastic proponent of free trade, having just secured an agreement with the UK and currently negotiating several others with some of the world's largest economies. But after years of painstaking negotiations for an agreement with the European Union, it appears that may be now in jeopardy. Trade Minister Don Farrell has just returned from those negotiations.
It's been a tough set of negotiations with the Europeans. What you have to remember, I think, Hamish, is that the Europeans did break off negotiations when the former Morrison government cancelled the contract with the Naval Group to build submarines in South Australia. We've managed to get those negotiations back on track, but I can't say that they've been easy. The Europeans are negotiating very hard about some of the issues that they're concerned about. But we're presenting an equally strong case, and I'm confident that with a bit of goodwill on both sides, we can get the negotiations back on track and resolve the outstanding issues. We've actually made quite a bit of progress on most of the issues, but the key issues for Australia, of course, is good access for our agricultural products into the European market. As you have just mentioned, this is an economy worth trillions of dollars, but more importantly, 450 million consumers. And we want to give them the opportunity to buy our wonderful food and wine.
Sure, I do want to get into the specifics of that, but on the question of goodwill, I know you left the talk saying Australia is not short of a dance partner. We spoke to the Agriculture Minister, Murray Watt, about this last week. He said Australia is willing to walk away. Are we demonstrating goodwill in this?
Oh, look, we certainly are. The fact that I was in Europe for 2 days last week negotiating with the Europeans, I think is a very good sign of goodwill. We've managed to get the negotiations back on track, and our officials are again meeting face to face over the next few weeks. And I've indicated I'm prepared to go back to Europe to have further discussions. So yes, we are demonstrating goodwill, but it takes two to tango, and the Europeans have to show that they're prepared to give our agriculture industry greater access to that European market.
So specifically, what does that mean? What is it that you want our agriculture sector to have access to? What are the products we're talking about? What are the regional sticking points in Europe on that?
We're talking about things like beef, like sheep meat, like sugar, any range of agricultural products which Australia produces wonderful food and wine, and we want the opportunity to sell our products into that huge European market.
And why won't they let you?
Oh, well, they've got their own concerns about protecting their own agriculture industry. They've got a range of particularly difficult issues at the moment, not least of which is the Ukraine and what's happened since the war between Russia and the terrible war between Russia and Ukraine is that Ukraine hasn't been able to get access to the Black Sea to get its products out to market, and so they're coming into Europe, and that's having an effect on the European farmers. So there's a range of particular issues that exist at the moment. We view this as a very long-term arrangement. So we say that this is our opportunity, Australia's opportunity, to get our products into that European market, and we're going to persist with the negotiations.
This obviously is important in the context of our soured trade relationship with China. The Chinese reportedly growing frustration that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese hasn't locked in a date to visit Beijing. The opposition says he shouldn't go until the rest of the trade restrictions are dropped. Is that the reason for the delay? Why won't he lock in a date at this point?
Oh, look, you'd have to ask the Prime Minister. He's got a very, very busy schedule, not least going to Europe next month for the NATO discussions.
But is dropping those trade restrictions a prerequisite for him visiting, in your view?
I've now met with my Chinese counterpart 3 times in the last couple of months, and again last week I met with the Deputy Trade Minister for China. We continue to make progress in removing the impediments that have been affecting Australia's food produce into China. We're going down that track. As we know, in the last couple of weeks, the Chinese have lifted the ban on Australian timber products. Last week, they lifted the ban on citrus and stone fruit from Australia, and we're expecting in the next couple of weeks a favourable decision on the tariff that has prevented Australian barley going into China. So bit by bit, we're resolving all of these. Sorry?
What gives you the impression there is good news imminent on that?
Oh, look, we, as you know, we decided to suspend our World Trade Organisation dispute over barley in return for a review by the Chinese government on the 80% tariff on Australian barley. They said that process would take a couple of months. We're coming to the end of that time, and Well, call me an optimist, Hamish, but I'm hopeful that at the end of that process, we'll see that 80% ban or that 80% tariff on Australian barley into China will be lifted.
That's Trade Minister Don Farrell there speaking with Hamish McDonald. You're on ABC News Radio. It's Thursday, the 15th of June. It's just gone 10:45 a.m. in the east, 10:15 in the centre and 8:45 in the west. Let's get a check of some of the latest headlines now. The federal government will introduce legislation to Parliament today to block Russia from building a new embassy close to Parliament House in Canberra. Anthony Albanese says the legislation is expected to be passed in both houses. 10 people remain in hospital 4 days after the bus crash in the New South Wales Hunter Valley that killed 10 other passengers. Crash investigators are now inspecting vehicles and documents at the depot of the bus company involved in the fatal crash. And Donald Trump's 2024 White House campaign team has announced that he's raised more than $10 million since being indicted on federal charges last week. Now to an ongoing story back home, and one of the country's tourism hotspots, Byron Bay, is hoping to have a strict cap on short-term rentals in place by this time next year to help relieve housing shortages. Other councils are watching on with interest as many grapple with how to get properties off the online rental platforms and back into the long-term residential rental market. As Nell Whitehead reports, one expert is warning Australia is far behind other countries when it comes to this kind of regulation.
When Helen from the Northern Rivers region in New South Wales separated from her husband, she struggled to find an affordable rental.
All of the places that people live have been turned into Airbnb. Anything that is available is outrageously priced because they can ask what they want.
Her cleaning business also struggles to find staff because there's nowhere for them to live.
People need so much more money, they can't afford to live here, so then the businesses that are here can't get staff, so then it just goes on, and it's just communities, small town communities. And I can't understand how our government has allowed it to just fester like this.
The Byron Shire Council is trying to impose a 60-day cap on holiday rentals, a plan opposed by the accommodation industry, which says they're vital to the region's billion-dollar tourism business. Mayor Michael Lyon sees it differently.
So when you look at our rental vacancy rate, it's been at or below 1%. We are probably one of the most expensive places in the state. We have the highest rate of homelessness. There's more homeless people in sheer numbers now than the city of Sydney. So this is why we need the balance. We don't want to wipe out the industry. We want it to remain an important part of the mix, but we need to break the investment model so we don't have people coming in, buying up properties, kicking out long-term tenants and turning them into short stays.
However, regulating the sector hasn't been easy, with tussles between the state government and council over who has the power to exercise the restrictions. Byron Mayor Michael Lyon says those issues still haven't been completely resolved, but he hopes to have the cap enforced within a year, setting a precedent for other New South Wales councils.
We're happy to do the heavy lifting because the lessons we learned through this process and getting a really good, strong framework in place will light the way for at least 10 or 15 other council areas that are suffering this exact same problem. In our view, permanent residents actually bring more value to the economy than what those tourists bring.
Nicole Gurran, who's a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Sydney, says the Byron case highlights the difficulties of regulating holiday lets in Australia.
Australia is very much behind the eight ball when it comes to making sure that we protect our residential housing stock for residential purposes. Cities like London, New York, San Francisco, all of the major European tourist cities have been regulating the short-term rental sector to prevent that conversion, that loss of long-term rentals to holiday homes for over a decade.
She says that's partly because holiday accommodation became a problem for them earlier, but Australia's mix of state and local planning laws have complicated efforts to regulate the industry.
The situation that we need to move to is empowering local councils to respond to issues in their local areas, and they're going to be different. And so it's about re-enabling local government to put the regulations in place that they need to regulate, and the 60-night cap is a good way to do that, as well as potentially other types of regulations such as differential taxes, which is being proposed by some local governments, as well as a more robust permit scheme.
However, she points out governments are moving slowly and enforcement is also difficult.
Nell Whitehead reporting there. Staying with housing, and there's still no sign of an agreement on the $10 billion housing fund, with the government and the Greens remaining at loggerheads on making any further concessions. Independent Senator David Pocock says the time to politic is over, with the need to put those wanting a roof over their heads first.
Unfortunately, it seems like we're at a bit of a stalemate in the Senate. The government have made some concessions in terms of the structure of the fund, ensuring that there is a guarantee of $500 million a year. And let's be clear, this is not the big solution that we need to housing, but it is a start. And while this has been languishing in the Senate for the last 4 months, 37,000 Australians have been turned away from short-term crisis accommodation or wanting longer-term social and affordable housing. It's 300 Australians a day are seeking that need can't be met. And so I'd really like to see this legislated. There will be a review in 2 years. We can push the government to actually increase the size of the fund then. But it really does seem time for the Greens and Labor to actually reach a deal. And let's not forget that the coalition is not supporting investment in social and affordable housing after they set up tens of billions of dollars of similar funds.
Senator, though, what should be given up here? Because the Greens had the two demands, which was to have more guaranteed money going into social and affordable housing, and the government did remove the cap on the $500 million per year and indicated it would go up with inflation. The Greens also want the rent freeze or rent caps, which the government has said can't be done because they can't tell the states and territories how to do that. Someone has got to give here. So I know you're saying to them, we'll just sort it out, it's enough of the politics, but what do you think should give?
Well, this is, I think, what the Senate is for the government to actually negotiate with the crossbench or other parties to get legislation through. And the government has moved on things like indexation, removing the cap, guaranteeing $500 million. I would like to see them do more, but the way that this legislation is going, the longer it just sits there, it's not helping anyone by not actually being invested and allowing that money, that return, to be invested in social and affordable housing.
So the Greens should accept what's on the table now?
That's a decision for the Greens. I'd urge them, I'd urge the coalition to actually support this. This is one measure of many. We need a far bigger conversation here in Australia about housing. And for me, the start of that conversation is, what is housing for? Is this a fundamental human right that people in our communities should have access to? Or is this an investment vehicle for people? And this fund will start to build social and affordable housing, but I'd really like to see us move on to the bigger questions around tax concessions and the way that we just prioritize investment in property above other good investments, and that has huge flow-on effects.
That's Independent Senator David Pocock there, speaking to the ABC's Lisa Miller. Now it's time for sport with Catherine Murphy. Welcome, Catherine.
Hello to you, Dale. It is a massive night tonight for golf fans. The third golf major of the year, the US Open, starts with 7 Australians due to tee off. It's the first major since the PGA announced their shock decision to merge with Live Golf. Last night, PGA Tour boss Jay Monahan stepped away from his position over an undisclosed medical situation. Meanwhile, as the players filtered through media, some had a lot to say about the merger, and they weren't all happy. World number 2 Jon Rahm said he found out about the decision via text.
It's a state of uncertainty that we don't love, but at the end of the day, I'm not a business expert. Some of those guys on the board and involved in this are. So I like to think they're going to make a better decision than I would, but I don't know. We'll see. There's still too many questions to be answered. I want to have faith that this is the best thing for all of us, but it's clear that that's not the consensus, right? I think the general feeling is that a lot of people feel a bit of betrayal from management. I get the secrecy. It's just not easy as a player that's been involved to wake up one day and see this bombshell.
There you have it. That was the view of the world number 2 Jon Rahm on that major, or on that decision of Live Golf and the PGA to merge. It was a massive shock. BBC golf correspondent Ian Carter is in Los Angeles. Carter says Rahm isn't the only angry player.
He's not alone. That much is clear, especially among the players who remained loyal to the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour. They're still trying to fathom why they were persuaded to stay with the status quo, and then for the establishment to then do a deal with the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, which alters the landscape massively going forward, although no one quite knows how that will manifest itself. So as Jon Rahm was saying there is an awful lot of uncertainty, and the players don't like to be kept in the dark, even though he understands why that was the case. You can understand also this sense of frustration that is permeating through some of the biggest names in the game.
Yeah, also news today at the top of the PGA Tour chief Jay Monahan. He is stepping away for the moment, it seems.
Yes, this is quite worrying on a human level, certainly. Jay Monahan informing the PGA Tour Policy Board that he is recuperating from a medical situation. The board fully supports him, as statement said, and appreciates everyone respecting his privacy. And during his absence, Ron Price, the Chief Operating Officer, and Tyler Dennis, the Executive Vice President and President of the PGA Tour, will be leading the day-to-day operations, which are going through an unprecedented phase, it must be said. Monahan has undergone an awful lot of stress throughout this whole process, and of course was heavily criticised in the wake of the deal, particularly given his outspoken comments about Saudi Arabia when he was trying to persuade players to stay with the PGA Tour and not defect to Live.
And how is the mood there? You've got PGA Tour and Live Golfers all at the same course, of course. We know that breakaway has ended a few friendships.
It has, most notably Sergio Garcia and Rory McIlroy, who were very good friends, but obviously Garcia going to Live, and a total breakdown in their relations. What I'm detecting is pretty much what I've seen at the Masters and the USPGA so far this year, which is that everything kind of gets put to one side when there's a major at stake, and no one wants to say anything that is going to antagonize the other side. There's a little bit of mischief in the draw as well. You've got Rory McIlroy playing with the PGA winner Brooks Koepka, who of course is part of the Live setup. But having said that, they played a practice round together at Augusta by choice, so there's not too much animosity there.
That was the BBC's golf correspondent Ian Carter speaking from Los Angeles ahead of the start of the US Open tonight. A lot going on and off the course, Dale.
Always is. Thank you so much for the update, Catherine. We'll speak with you again in the next half hour.
Thank you, Dale.
And let's get a quick look at the weather around the capital cities now, starting in Brisbane, where it's sunny today and currently 18 degrees, reaching for a top of 22. Sydney, you're 14 and sunny, looking at a top of 18 today. Canberra, partly cloudy, currently 11 degrees. Melbourne, a shower or two for you today, currently 14 degrees. Hobart, it's mostly sunny there, actually 10 degrees, reaching for a top of 15. Adelaide, you're expecting possible showers today and you're currently on 13 degrees, reaching for a top of 17. Perth, showers today and 17. And Darwin, sunny and 28 degrees currently. It's news time.
Good morning, Helen Zaremus with ABC News. Liberal Senator David Van has challenged Senator Lydia Thorpe to take her sexual assault allegation against him outside of the Senate chamber. Senator Thorpe has since withdrawn the allegation she made yesterday under parliamentary privilege, but has flagged she's planning to make a further comment today. Senator Van has told Nine he has again denied ever harassing or assaulting Senator Thorpe and accused her of hiding behind parliamentary privilege.
If she has any belief that anything happened, I'd encourage her to take it to the police. Don't hide behind parliamentary privilege. Take it to police. Let the courts decide on this.
New laws to block the Russian government from building an embassy near Parliament House in Canberra have now passed the Senate. Jade Toomey reports.
The government introduced surprise legislation this morning that cancels Russia's lease of the land, getting around a federal court decision that let Russia keep it. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill says Australia could not allow a Russian embassy in the shadows of Capitol Hill.
The government has received clear national security advice that this would be a threat to our national security.
The bill passed the House of Representatives in less than 5 minutes and also sailed through the Senate. Liberal Senator James Paterson says the opposition was happy to support the move.
It is important on sensitive national security issues like this that in the national interest we come together.
The Russian embassy says it'll comment later today.
An Australian man jailed in Pakistan for 2 years for attempting to overthrow the government has been released. 53-year-old Hassan Askari was jailed after sending a letter urging change in Pakistan and calling for the resignation of the country's then Chief of Army. The Sydney man detained in secret and has spent much of his sentence in solitary. Mr. Askari's sister, Zara Mehdi, says he's in really good spirits.
He was very excited to see sunlight. He wanted to sit in the sun, even though it was almost 40 degrees. But he said, I've just been missing that. But he's been otherwise very excited to see his parents.
The head of Origin Energy says Australia's move to clean energy will require a Herculean effort. The federal government set a target of 82% renewable electricity generation by the year 2030. But Origin Energy's Frank Calabria says achieving the target will need more investment and better coordination to build the infrastructure required.
The existing transmission system is largely connected where coal power stations were, and we will need to build a lot of wind and solar.
The first of several inquests into the deaths of Northern Territory Indigenous women from domestic violence has heard Alice Springs is in a dire situation with little support for victims. Melissa McKay reports.
Larissa Ellis is the CEO of WASCA, the Women's Safety Services here in Central Australia. She said that their service that can sleep 31 women and children is almost always full. She said that even if she had a 60-bed service, that she would be able to fill that quite easily. We know that the Northern Territory has the highest rates of domestic, family and sexual violence of anywhere in the country. And Ms Ellis and her staff are, on the front line of that. She is expected to continue giving evidence today.
Crash investigators are inspecting vehicles and documents at the depot of the bus company involved in the fatal bus crash in the Hunter Valley. Tazelle Wakatama reports.
10 people remain in hospital 4 days after the bus crash in the Hunter Valley that killed 10 people. The bus involved was part of Link Bus Line's fleet. Police have told the ABC officers from the Traffic and Highway Patrol Command, Traffic Operations Group and Crash Investigation Unit, along with investigators and inspectors from the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, have attended the East Gresford Depot today to conduct a heavy vehicle compliance audit. The joint operation involves checking documents and all vehicles at the depot. The bus driver is on bail, facing 10 charges of dangerous and negligent driving occasioning death.
And Donald Trump's 2024 White House campaign team has announced He's raised more than $10 million since being indicted on federal charges last week. Analysts say the former US president's message that he's being politically persecuted continues to resonate with his supporters. Donald Trump is accused of illegally retaining classified documents after leaving the White House. He's also accused of conspiring to obstruct a federal investigation into the matter. ABC News.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Good morning, I'm Dale Drinkwater. Coming up, new concerns raised over embattled consulting firm PwC's links to a tertiary college, and Donald Trump turns 77 under the shadow of criminal charges with the threat of more to come.
Today we witnessed the most evil and heinous abuse of power in the history of our country. Very sad thing to watch.
But first this half hour, new laws to block the Russian government from building an embassy near Parliament House in Canberra have now passed the Senate. The bill gets around a federal court decision last month that invalidated an eviction order by the National Capital Authority. Political reporter Matthew Doran has more.
This all kicked off in August last year when the National Capital Authority, which effectively manages a lot of the sites in and around the parliamentary triangle here in Canberra, invoked what many have described as a sort of use it or lose it policy over a parcel of land just down the hill from us here in Parliament House, which had been earmarked for a new Russian embassy. The Russian embassy currently in Canberra is in the suburb of Griffith, about a 5-minute drive or so from the proposed site, but the Russian government had taken a lease on that parcel of land back in 2011 and had committed to building a new embassy there within a period of 3 years. Fast forward to 2022 and no construction work had been completed to a level that the NCA thought was appropriate, so the NCA cancelled the lease. Now at the time, the NCA said that there was no link between that and the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. However, I think it's fair to say that any goodwill that may well have been extended to the Russian government had well and truly dried up by then. The Russian government took the NCA to the federal court, and after some wrangling late last month, the federal court actually ruled in favour of the Russian government, saying that it could hold on to that lease and that it could continue building its new diplomatic mission. Fast forward to today, and the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill called a press conference early this morning before the House and the Senate began sitting for the day, and announced what was considered by many to be surprise legislation, effectively blocking the Russian embassy expansion or construction at that site in the shadow of Parliament House. Anthony Albanese saying that this is based on security advice, given the proximity of that site to the centre of Australia's democracy.
And it's based upon very specific advice as well about the nature of the construction that's proposed for this site, about the location of this site, and about the capability that would present in terms of potential interference with activity that occurs in this Parliament House. That is why we are taking this action. We're doing it very quickly.
Matthew, what's the Prime Minister had to say about extra support for Ukraine in dealing with Russia's illegal invasion?
Well, Karina, any incident where the Prime Minister's talking about Russia, this is an obvious question that is put to him. The calls that have come from the Ukrainian government, including its representative here in Canberra, for more Australian military aid to be sent to the country as it tries to repel that Russian invasion. There has been criticism levelled at the government, including from the federal opposition, that it hasn't been doing enough, that it's effectively gone quiet on further military aid. Anthony Albanese dismissing those suggestions, saying that Bushmaster armoured vehicles are rolling off the production line and onto Australian planes to be shipped or indeed flown over to Europe to aid Ukraine's resistance there. We know that there are discussions afoot as to whether old Australian fighter jets could be brought into commission to train the Ukrainian Air Force to then bolster their air defences there. This seems to be building to something of an announcement in the lead up to, or indeed at, the NATO summit in early July in Lithuania. The Prime Minister is going to be attending that summit despite Australia not being a NATO member. We are expecting some form of an announcement of further Australian support at that stage.
Political reporter Matthew Doran there speaking with Karina Carvalho. There are new questions facing embattled consulting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers this morning, this time over links to a tertiary college. PwC is already under the spotlight after it was caught leaking sensitive tax information to help their clients. Linton Besser has broken this story.
A $5.5 million stake in a private college called Top Education Group at the same time that it was consulting for the federal regulator which oversees Top Education Group and many other colleges. Not only did the firm take that interest in the company and take a seat on the board, but 8 senior partners also personally invested into the company, and it was doing a range of work for the regulator at the same time. It was doing, it was providing management advice. It was doing assessments of the way providers of contestability reviews is what they call it. It even seconded staff inside the regulator. Now the regulator says that PricewaterhouseCoopers had no role in any of its regulatory decisions, but decisions by this agency have had significant impacts on Top Education Group and others. So there are questions about a potential conflict of interest there. TEXA, the federal regulator, Karina, says that it cannot find any documents in which PricewaterhouseCoopers ever declared its interest in the company. PricewaterhouseCoopers, on the other hand, insists that it did fulfill all of its disclosure obligations. Yeah, there were eight senior partners of the firm. About a year after the firm took an interest, they were invited also to buy shares, and combined they bought $2.5 million worth of these shares in the run-up to the company floating on the Hong Kong Securities Exchange. And there's no allegation about the conduct of any of these partners with respect to Top Education or TEXA. 2 of them were the most recent former chief executives of PricewaterhouseCoopers, including Tom Seymour, who sat on the board of Top Education Group and, of course, who has had to stand down in the midst of this current imbroglio over leaked Treasury information. Well, the regulator is saying that they're kind of frantically searching through all of their PricewaterhouseCoopers documents to identify any kind of declaration of interest. They did point out to me that any kind of federal consulting contract like that automatically requires a disclosure. So they're hunting for that, and I'm sure there'll be further questions asked of PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Linton Besser reporting there. A pre-inquest hearing into a police shooting will be held in Brisbane today, 6 months after the incident. The religiously motivated terrorist attack left 2 officers and a neighbour dead before the attackers were shot and killed by police. Michael Rennie has the details from Brisbane.
It's certainly one of the darkest days ever seen for the Queensland Police Service, but it was today we'll see a pre-inquest hearing into that terrible, horrific incident. A pre-motivated incident that happened in Williambilla on the Western Darling Downs, and saw those 2 police officers killed in Rachel McCrow and Matthew Arnold, and then the neighbour as well of that property, Alan Dare, was also killed, and police labelled it a religiously motivated attack. In fact, they went as far as calling it a domestic terror attack, and those responsible were, of course, Nathaniel, Gareth and Stacey Train. So today that tragedy will be revisited here at the Brisbane Coroner's Court, and the State Coroner, Terry Ryan, he is expected to outline plans for the inquiry, including what issues will be examined and what needs to be done to ensure something like this never happens again.
Michael Rennie there reporting from Brisbane. You're on ABC News Radio. It's Thursday the 15th of June. It's coming up to 11:15 a.m. in the east, 11:45 in the centre and 9:15 a.m. in the west. Let's get some news headlines now. 10 people remain in hospital 4 days after the bus crash in the New South Wales Hunter Valley that killed 10 passengers. Crash investigators are now inspecting vehicles and documents at the depot of the bus company involved in the fatal crash. Donald Trump's 2024 White House campaign team has announced that he has raised more than $10 million since being indicted on federal charges last week. And high concentrations of an essential element for all biological processes on Earth have been detected in ice crystals on Saturn. To more news now, and the United States military has been given unimpeded access to key PNG defence facilities, including the joint PNG Australia Lombrum Naval Base on Manus Island, as part of a sweeping defence cooperation agreement. The 15-year agreement has been made public for the first time since it was signed last month, after it was tabled in PNG's parliament. Debate on the deal is ongoing, and it's to be ratified by Parliament at a later date. ABC's PNG correspondent Timothy Swanston has more.
It certainly has been a bit of a roller coaster week, but look, I guess, as far as this Defence Cooperation Agreement and the Shipwriters Agreement are concerned, we've finally seen the text of the document. So this was signed between the United States and PNG last month on the sidelines of the FIPIC, the Forum for India-Pacific Islands Cooperation, which was effectively used as an opportunity for United States leaders to come over as well at the same opportunity. So US Secretary of State Antony Blinken came to Papua New Guinea, and of course we saw the signing of the Defence Cooperation Agreement and the Shipwriters Agreement. Now, it caused a lot of concern domestically, and part of that was due to the fact that the text of the document hadn't been made public, but now finally it's been tabled into Parliament, and we've seen debate on the document yesterday. In effect, it basically sort of grants what we expected that it would. There's two more contentious articles, if you will, that people had raised concerns about. Firstly is, in effect, that for mutually agreed activities, it gives unimpeded access to United States military forces to a number of key locations. So those are Lombrum Military Base, as well as several airports around Papua New Guinea, as well as seaports. Now, the other kind of concerning article that I'm sure will raise a few eyebrows here is in relation to US forces retaining exclusive right to effectively the criminal jurisdiction over US personnel as well. So it's a fairly sweeping sort of security deal, and one that we sort of largely expected based on some leaks of the document some time ago, but has of course finally been made public now.
That's our PNG correspondent, Timothy Swanston, reporting there. Staying on issues overseas, former US President Donald Trump has been celebrating his 77th birthday and is remaining defiant a day after pleading not guilty in court to charges of mishandling sensitive files. His rivals for the Republican Party's nomination to run against President Joe Biden next year might be hoping it will aid their cause. But Jared Monshine from the US Studies Center is convinced it'll only strengthen Trump's standing among his loyal base.
There's a legal battle obviously going on, as well as a political one, and there's no one who has sort of combined the court of law with the court of public opinion better than Donald Trump. And right now, the most important public opinion to him is that amongst Republican voters, and he has over 80 to 90% approval ratings amongst Republicans, and over 80% think that these charges against him were politically motivated and he should not be not face any significant penalty for them. So right now, legally, it is not looking great. His own former attorney general called the indictment against him pretty damning. But with that said, in the court of public opinion, especially amongst Republican voters who he's really trying to court ahead of the presidential election, he's doing pretty well.
Yeah, look, he's really leaning into that accusation that these are politically motivated charges. This is what he had to say last night, his time, at a speech that he gave at an event.
Today we witnessed the most evil and heinous abuse of power in the history of our country. Very sad thing to watch. A corrupt sitting president had his top political opponent arrested on fake and fabricated charges of which he and numerous other presidents would be guilty. Right in the middle of a presidential election in which he is losing very badly. Under the Presidential Records Act, which is civil, not criminal, I had every right to have these documents.
I just want to pick up on that last comment, Jared, because that was central to the case that he made last night, that under the Presidential Records Act, he did actually have the right to retain these documents. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but from the legal experts who have commented on this, not many agree with him on that. And the sort of the record and the evidence against him on this is pretty strong. He even admits in some of the testimony or in some of in the indictment and some of the quotes that he shared, that he spoke to his lawyer, that he knew he should not be sharing the information that he had. He knew he should not have the classified documents and that he should not be showing them to the people who did not have appropriate clearance. And he knew that he no longer had the ability to declassify them because he was no longer president. Nonetheless, he still kept them. And that is what's striking here, is that in so many instances you saw with former Vice President Mike Pence, with Joe Biden, with Hillary Clinton, they eventually, in one way or the other, would comply with requests from the National Archives or the other government agencies relevant to these issues. With that said, Donald Trump, in a number of different manners, did not comply whatsoever, according to the indictment.
And that line that it's a politically motivated attack really resonates with his supporters. He often says Hillary Clinton wasn't prosecuted for having that private email server. He quotes Joe Biden and even Mike Pence, who also had some records at their place. Do you think that there is any element of truth that it is politically motivated, these charges?
Well, that's, the political motivation is in the eye of the beholder. But according to a number of Republicans, including a number of his backers, they really see these charges as inevitable. They really, a number of Republican supporters, including those in Congress, have said that he really did not give the government any other options. They were patient, they were thorough. The Department of Justice, who is prosecuting this case, they avoid political matters like this. They do not want to prosecute a former president, let alone one who is running for re-election again. They go out of their way to avoid these sorts of issues, and yet a lot of Republicans in the Department of Justice themselves say he didn't give them any options.
That's Jared Mondschein from the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney, speaking with Madeline Morris. Staying overseas now, and artificial intelligence technology is developing at high speed and is transforming many aspects of modern life. But some experts have been warning that it could be used for malicious purposes and threaten jobs. Today, the European Parliament approved the EU's landmark rules for artificial intelligence. Known as the EU AI Act, it aims to put new restrictions on the use of this technology. Brando Benifei has been part of the decision-making process and is a member of the European Parliament.
We identify areas that are particularly high-risk areas, such as employment, health, development of children, democracy, critical infrastructure, where we see potential high risk for people. And so in these cases, we ask for a conformity assessment that will be self-assessment done by the businesses, but under their own responsibility, to follow some basic rules about data quality, about human oversight, about technical requirements. And we also identify some too high risk that brings to a ban. So we ban emotional recognition in workplaces and in schools. We ban the use of biometric cameras in public spaces for surveillance in real time. We ban predictive policing and social scoring. The idea of this regulation is to pave the way for a global dialogue on how to regulate AI, and we hope this will be a good contribution.
That's member of the European Parliament, Brando Benifei, speaking to the BBC about the EU's big new rules for artificial intelligence. And to other big news now, we're joined by Catherine Murphy for all the latest sporting news.
Hello to you, Dale. The Brisbane Lions have revealed that veterans Daniel Rich and Jack Gunston have asked to be left out of the team which will face the Sydney Swans at the Gabba tomorrow night. Coach Chris Fagan says both players approached him on Monday and said they don't believe their form warrants selection. Rich has played just 7 games this season and has struggled defensively, while Gunston has kicked just 11 goals from 11 matches since crossing to the club from Hawthorn. Brisbane have lost their past 2 games. Fagan says the duo will enter a training block in the hope of getting back to their best rather than playing in the reserves. Sticking with AFL, and Hawthorn captain James Sicily and Richmond's Ryan Mansell will appeal against their respective 3-match bans, which they were handed at the AFL tribunal earlier this week. Sicily was suspended for a tackle that concussed Brisbane midfielder Hugh McCluggage, while Mansell was found guilty of rough conduct for a bump that left Freo's James Aish with concussion. Mansell's appeal will be heard tonight, while Sicily's, that one will have to wait until Monday and after the Hawks' bye. Now to swimming, and Olympic champion Kaylee McCune has set the 3rd fastest women's 100-metre backstroke time in history. McCune went close to breaking her own world record on the second night of Australia's World Championship trials in Melbourne. She was among several Australians to book their places at next month's meet in Japan, including veteran Cameron McAvoy, who won the men's 50-metre butterfly. The son of Australian swimming great Hayley Lewis, Kai Taylor, he claimed victory in the men's 200-metre freestyle. England has named veteran paceman Stuart Broad in its team for the opening Ashes cricket test against Australia, starting at Edgbaston on Friday. Broad has been selected over Mark Wood to join James Anderson and Ollie Robinson in the host pace attack. Anderson and Robinson have recovered from injuries, while off-spinner Moeen Ali has also been included in the 11 after coming out of retirement to replace the injured spinner Jack Leach. Captain Ben Stokes bowled in the nets at training overnight despite ongoing concerns over his left knee. Cam Smith and Jason Day head a 7-strong contingent of Australian golfers in the field for the US Open, which starts tonight in Los Angeles. It will be the first major since the shock merger between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf. Day says he's looking forward to the LIV defectors returning.
You need the likes of some of those guys that went over to LIV, and a lot of those guys are still my friends. So I'm happy for them to come back. And I know that they took a risk to go over there, but, other guys might think differently.
It is going to be fascinating. Nick Kyrgios has revealed he spent time in a psychiatric hospital in London after losing at Wimbledon in 2019. The Australian was knocked out that year by Rafael Nadal in the second round in a memorable contest. Kyrgios has been speaking about a dark time in his life in a new episode of the documentary Breakpoint, which will be released within days. It covers his run to the 2022 final. If you or anyone you know is struggling, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Now to results on the court during the night, and Aussies Rinky Hijikata and Chris O'Connell have both qualified for quarterfinals on the ATP Tour. Hijikata is through to the final 8 in the Netherlands. He defeated Switzerland's Marc-Andrea Huesler in 3 sets, while O'Connell is set to continue his climb up the rankings after beating Italy's Lorenzo Sonego in straight sets in Stuttgart, 7-6, 6-3. It will be Chris O'Connell's 4th ATP quarterfinal this year. He's having a great season, Dale.
Thank you so much, Catherine Murphy. We are about just a few minutes away, actually, from getting an update on unemployment figures. The jobless rate is expected to remain steady. Just quickly looking at the markets, the ASX 200 is up slightly, 0.2% to 7,177. The Australian dollar is slightly flat, buying 67.6 US cents. Now for a look at the weather around the capital cities this Thursday, the 15th of June. In Brisbane, sunny today, reaching for a top of 18 degrees. Sydney, sunny, also reaching for a top of 18, currently 14 there. Canberra, partly cloudy, you're looking at 13 degrees today. Melbourne, a shower 2 and 16. Hobart, mostly sunny there and reaching for 15 degrees. A few possible showers in Adelaide, a top of 17 degrees there. Perth, showers and 19 today. Darwin, sunny and 33 degrees. You're getting pretty close in the late 20s there now. It is news time.
Helen Zaremus with ABC News. The National Australia Bank's chief economist says there's a 50-50 chance the country could slide into economic recession. Alan Oster says the bank's internal data and recent business surveys suggest a significant economic slowdown. He says the bank has lowered its growth expectations and is tipping unemployment to rise.
I do buy the idea that if unemployment goes up by 1% over a year, that's a bit of an issue, and our forecasts have that. So I think it's 50-50. It's going to look and feel recessionary to a lot of people, is the bottom line.
Lifeline says a new crisis support call centre being launched in Melbourne will help ease pressure on the national call service and provide support to more people in need. The details from Zalika Rismol.
Victoria is the leading source of Lifeline calls nationally, with 360,000 Victorians calling the service each year. But on-the-ground support in the state is insufficient. Just 138,000 calls were answered by Victorian call takers last year. There are around 250 active crisis supporters in the state, about half the number needed. It's hoped the new Lifeline NAM Centre will attract more local volunteers and help reduce suicide deaths, which jumped 9% in Victoria last year.
Australia's latest unemployment figures have just been released, and the unemployment rate for May has dropped from 3.7% in April to 3.6%. Advocates say legislation making it easier for trans and gender diverse Queenslanders to change their birth certificates will be life-changing. Last night, Queensland's Parliament passed a bill to allow people to change the sex on their birth certificates without having to have sexual reassignment surgery first. Jeremy Wiggins from Transcend Australia says it's a great step forward.
The impact it has is almost indescribable. It's like being able to wake up and feel like everything around you and all your documentation and your life is reflective of who you are.
And more on Australia's unemployment figures. Officials say the jobs data estimates almost 76,000 jobs were added to the economy last month, sending unemployment down in May to 3.6%. The strong figures came as a shock to economists who were typically expecting 15,000 jobs to be added last month and the unemployment rate to remain steady at 3.7%. The New South Wales Independent Pricing Tribunals approve rate rises of up to 45% for some local government areas. Sean Tarrant-Goodwin reports.
The tribunal that oversees rate increases across the state has reviewed applications by some local councils to raise rates above a previously set benchmark. That means double-digit rate rises for 12 of the 17 councils that applied. Residents in Lithgow face the highest increase at 45% for the next financial year. Tenterfield, Walker and Strathfield also face rate hikes above 35%. The tribunal has called on the state government to review local councils' financial model, looking at why some councils can only maintain financial sustainability through substantial rate increases.
Rugby union star Kurtley Beale has pleaded not guilty to sexually assaulting a woman in the bathroom of a hotel in Sydney's East. It's alleged Kurtley Beale assaulted the 28-year-old in a toilet at the Beach Road Hotel in Bondi in December. He's faced court today charged with 3 sexual offences after one was dropped. He's spoken outside court after pleading not guilty to all offences, saying he's devastated and the truth will come out. 3 homes on a Hobart housing development, which was partially evacuated 2 years ago because of safety concerns, will now be demolished. More from Isabella Podwinski.
Residents living in 8 homes on McGill Rise in Claremont, north of Hobart, were evacuated in 2021 after an audit of construction work and independent engineering advice found the homes were uninhabitable. Glenorchy City Council has served demolition orders for 3 of the houses. They haven't been lived in since 2021. Mayor Beck Thomas says investigations revealed the houses were constructed on unstable platforms, which meant they were structurally unsound and posed a safety risk. She says 5 other properties at McGill Rise are being monitored for further damage, but do not pose the same risk.
I'm Helen Zaremus. You've been listening to ABC News.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Good morning. I'm Dale Drinkwater. Coming up, the latest employment figures are released. We'll bring you all the details with our reporter Daniel Ziffer. And a new study finds more young families are in financial stress. Official jobs data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics estimates that nearly 76,000 jobs were added to the economy last month, sending unemployment down to 3.6%. The strong figures came as a shock to economists who were typically expecting 15,000 jobs to be added last month and the unemployment rate to remain steady at 3.7%. To get the details, I'm joined by business reporter Dan Ziffer. Welcome, Daniel.
Lovely to speak to you, Dale.
So, Dan, what do these figures show us?
Well, they show us that the economy is still really strong, particularly when it comes to employment. We already knew we had a labour shortage. That is, there are not enough workers to do the jobs that companies want done. And we are seeing that now with unemployment falling. Again, to have an unemployment rate with a 3 in front of it is weird historically. We're looking at 3.6% being the unemployment rate, which means a very tight labour market, people really struggling to find workers, and it being easier for people to get work than it has been previously.
And how did today's figures compare to the expectations? I just mentioned it shocked economists. Why is it so shocking?
Well, it shocked economists because they thought that, we're going to have this tightening. We've got interest rates rising. We've got spending coming down as people tighten up. So the Reserve Bank is trying to defeat inflation by lifting interest rates. They're taking a lot of money out of the economy, and particularly on the kind of consumer spending, retail side of the economy. That means those companies have less money coming in. Sometimes they employ fewer people, or they get their employees to work fewer hours. What we're seeing, though, is a really strong employment, partly because we just haven't had a lot of migration since the pandemic. So the number of employed people in Australia reached 14 million for the first time, and there's now 2 percentage points more people employed, a higher share of the population employed than before the pandemic. Now, a small amount of that will be because COVID opened up new ways of working, more flexible and remote work. A larger part of that is because people are feeling the pinch of increased housing costs and increased inflation, and they are working more and taking on more work.
So you suggested that it does suggest that the economy is a little bit stronger than previously thought, but what kind of reaction can we expect from this, from leadership or from political figures or from, those in decision-making roles?
Well, more for the people listening, the biggest impact is probably going to be that there'll be more interest rate hikes. The Reserve Bank wants to tame high inflation, which is currently for consumers around 7%. So that's the price at which prices are increasing year on year. It's currently around 7%. They want it to be below 3%. and they're going to keep increasing interest rates to take money out of the economy to reduce that heat of the economy until it gets down there. So when they see a really strong result here of people working and getting money and having more employment, that's going to add weight to lifting rates to reduce the amount of money in the economy. It's a weird way about it. Essentially, it's the beatings will continue until morale improves, but it's the lever that they have to try and take the heat out of the economy and lower inflation.
That's our business reporter, Daniel Ziffer, there explaining the context around this unemployment, which we've just has been released and is down to 3.6%. Thank you, Daniel Ziffer. And let's take a look at some other news now. And heading overseas, an Australian man jailed in Pakistan for the last 2 years is on his way home after he was released overnight. 53-year-old risk analyst Hassan Askari from Sydney was court-martialed and jailed after he sent a letter urging change in Pakistan and the resignation of the country's then chief of army. He was convicted of attempting to overthrow the government. His release has been a moment of pure joy for Mr. Askari's family, including his sister Zara Mehdi, who's advocated on his behalf.
Oh, we are over the moon. We are just so happy and so excited. It's finally been released today. So it's just the best day. Just the best day.
What sort of condition is he in?
He's in really good spirits. He's been laughing and talking. He looks well. I don't know. He says that I've eaten well and I've been okay. I've remained really positive throughout this time, which is amazing. He was very excited to see sunlight. He wanted to sit in the sun, even though it was almost 40 degrees. But he said, I've just been missing that. But he's been otherwise very excited to see his parents. And he's, again, kind of apologizing for all the pain that he has caused us. But it's just been a delight to see him.
What were the first words you said to each other? What was that moment like after so many years?
It was just hugging and kissing, I suppose. I just said, "Are you okay?" And he just said, "I am perfectly fine. I'm just perfectly fine. Don't worry." I mean, I think it was just he was consoling us that I'm okay. Don't worry. I said, how are you mentally? Are you physically? He says, I'm perfect. I have no stress, nothing. Don't worry about me. So those were the first things that I think we spoke about. Yeah.
I know this for some years was a silent struggle for you and your family. You made the decision to go public not all that long ago. How have things changed since then?
Oh, I think that was the best step that we took. It is less than 3 months. On 28th of March, we went public for the first time. We had a press conference and things changed from there on. The pressure that built from the media, the piece that Hamish Hugh did with the project, was unbelievable. How that started the pressure with the government, from the High Commission, it changed. The High Commissions immediately got response from the government, and they had their first meeting with Hassan, which they couldn't for the last 2 years, which I don't understand why. But the media pressure, the questions that you raised with the government made an immense difference. And it was just the awareness was much more. So I really want to thank you. I do want to thank the government of Australia, also the High Commission here in Pakistan, and their efforts, but also all the supporters, the change.org, that petition that we started had over 12,000 supporters. They, all of them, and Saloni Dua, she's the person from change.org, change.org, who has helped me throughout this campaign as well. Mehreen Faruqi, the Senator Mehreen Faruqi was amazing. She raised it with Honorable Penny Wong as well. And all this pressure worked somehow. And I think the media pressure also in Pakistan, plus our court cases, I don't know what helped, but somehow we got the result day before yesterday when it was in the courts, in the army courts. They remitted the rest of his sentence.
That's Zahra Mehdi, who is in Pakistan right now, celebrating the release of her brother Hassan. She was speaking with Hamish McDonald. You're on ABC News Radio. It's Thursday, the 15th of June. It's coming up to 11:45 in the east, 11:15 in the centre, and 10:45 in the west. Let's get a check of some of the headlines now. The unemployment rate drops to 3.6% as 76,000 jobs are added to the economy. New laws to block the Russian government from building an embassy near Parliament House in Canberra have now passed the Senate. And 10 people remain in hospital 4 days after the bus crash in the New South Wales Hunter Valley, which killed 10 passengers. Crash investigators are now inspecting vehicles and documents at the depot of the bus company involved in the fatal accident. More young families are in financial stress, according to a new report. A survey published by consulting firm Digital Finance Analytics says nearly 2 million households are spending more than they earn. The data shows migrants and young families in regional cities like Toowoomba, Wagga Wagga, Ballarat and Tamworth are the most vulnerable to rental or mortgage pressures. Martin North is the principal of Digital Finance Analytics and a banking sector analyst.
We look at money in, money out. So basically the definition of stress is if people are spending more every month than they're actually receiving from various sources of income, that of course means they've got a cash flow deficit, and that means we classify them as stressed if it's a mortgage stress, rental stress, or overall financial stress, looking at it at an aggregate level. So it's a cash flow measure.
Okay, now run me through the postcodes in Australia, or maybe the areas of Australia doing it the toughest off the back of your findings.
Yeah, so if we look at mortgage stress, this is really, one of the main epicenters. So the postcode, the area is Campbelltown in New South Wales. It has the most significant count of households in mortgage stress, and there's more than 12,000 in that area. And that's a very large proportion of the total number of households who've taken out a mortgage and are trying to service that mortgage. And then you go to Liverpool, another New South Wales postcode, then across to Western Australia, so Tapping, and then Toowoomba up in Queensland, and then down to Victoria, like Roxburgh Park and Narre Warren and places like that. Those are often high growth corridors. In other words, a lot of construction and building in recent years, a lot of new first time buyers, a lot of them took mortgages out when interest rates were ultra low and when prices were racing away. And of course, government stimulus was encouraging people to buy. So we often find that it's those high growth corridors, plus some regional areas. Ballarat's another example of an area of regional Australia where there are issues. So you see these hot spots across various parts of the country, and no part of the country is missing out when you look at the list.
Two hotspots at the top.
in to help them address it.
How much research has been done in this area?
Very little specifically with farmers. So we're really lucky at UniSA.
And feel recessionary to a lot of people. We're observing a really big slowdown starting now, but it's exactly what the Reserve Bank is trying to do. It's trying to essentially take money out of households and get them to spend less, and therefore hopefully get inflation down a bit quicker.
That's National Australia Bank Chief Economist Alan Oster there. And speaking of recessions, it's already happening in New Zealand. Peter, can you tell us a bit about that, please?
Well, that's right. Across the ditch, they've had those 2 consecutive quarterly contractions that make a technical recession, but no major surprise given that the Reserve Bank of New Zealand has been quite explicit about wanting to engineer a recession to tame inflation. It's delivered the most aggressive tightening since 1999, lifting its cash rate by 5.25 percentage points to a 14-year high, actually 6 months ahead of Australia's Reserve Bank, which has been criticised for not acting fast enough on inflation. It does look as though rate rises in New Zealand have probably peaked, unlike here in Australia, where 1, maybe 2 more rate rises are likely later on this year, and that narrow path in avoiding a recession could disappear, and like New Zealand, Australia might end up having another recession we had to have.
That's our senior business correspondent, Peter Ryan, there. Well, consulting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers is facing more questions about conflicts of interest today, with revelations that it invested millions of dollars into a controversial education group just 1 day after it started a consulting contract with a federal agency which regulates the sector. On top of that, 8 senior partners at PwC also made their own personal investments in the company. ABC Investigations has uncovered those details, and I spoke with reporter Linton Besser a short time ago. So, Linton, what exactly has your investigation found that PwC did?
Well, Naz, it's this interesting case of PricewaterhouseCoopers taking an investment, a $5.5 million investment in a private education provider called Top Education Group. And it did that at the same time as it was consulting for the federal agency which regulates these very private colleges, Top Education Group and many others. It was providing top-level management advice on things like provider risk contestability reviews. It was seconding its own staff into TEQSA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency. And when I asked the regulator about what disclosures PricewaterhouseCoopers had made to the regulator when it was undertaking these contracts, it's told me that it has been unable to find any paperwork in which PricewaterhouseCoopers discloses this potential conflict of interest.
And you just mentioned it there, but the college that PwC invested in was called Top Education Group. But why exactly was that company so controversial?
Well, Top Education Group hit the headlines in late 2016 when it emerged that it had covered the cost of a travel blowout from the former Labor Senator Sam Dastyari. Mr. Dastyari had reached out to this company to get it to pay for this kind of travel overspend in late 2015. So that's, probably where people, know of the name and have seen kind of press coverage of it. But it's a very politicised firm, actually. It's made a gargantuan number of political donations, campaign finance contributions to both the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. It's also got some really interesting links back to China. Its business model is bringing international students into Australia to do its courses primarily from China. And one of its most significant shareholders is a company that's partners with the central government in a military firm. It's also that shareholder has also got links to Harbin University, which is a very prominent kind of military technology institution in Beijing. It's got a director that has been a vice president on the Committee for Peaceful Reunification of China, which just a short time ago was declared by the Attorney General's Department to be an agent of foreign influence. They have these interesting links back to China, and they have been, prominent political donors. They like to publish photos of their former chief executive with Prime Ministers past, Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard.
And there were also senior partners with PwC that actually invested personally here.
That's right. In 2017, a year after PwC itself took a stake in Top Education Group, 8 senior partners took a personal stake for a combined $2.5 million, including its 2 most recent chief executives, Luke Sayers and Tom Seymour. Now, there are no allegations of misconduct by any of those partners, and indeed no allegations of misconduct by PricewaterhouseCoopers in the way that it performed its work for the regulator and with Top Education Group. It's this question about a potential conflict of interest. Now, while Texas says, the regulator says it can't find any disclosures, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Naz, said to me, it has fulfilled all of its disclosure obligations to the Department of Education and the tertiary education regulator. So there's 2 different stories going on there. But certainly, a year after the company took a stake, these senior partners did also.
Linton Besser, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Naz.
ABC Investigations reporter Linton Besser there. The federal government has made rushed laws through Parliament to tear up plans for a new Russian embassy in Canberra. Political reporter Matthew Doran is in our Parliament House studio. Matt, thanks for joining us. How did we get to this stage?
Naz, good afternoon. This all comes from a decision back in August 2022 when the National Capital Authority, which effectively manages all the sites in and around the the parliamentary triangle here in Canberra, invoked what's effectively a use it or lose it sort of clause on Russia's lease over a parcel of land very close to Parliament House. They'd leased this land to build a new embassy back in 2011, and the NCA said they hadn't done enough to actually follow through on that sort of construction, so they tore it up. That then got challenged in the federal court, and it was late last month that the Russian government was successful in its claim there in the court, saying that it still wanted to use that land and should be given the opportunity to do so. Fast forward to today, and Anthony Albanese has announced this SNAP legislation, and it has been put through Parliament. He says that there's been an assessment that a new Russian facility that close to Parliament House simply isn't the right thing to do.
And it's based upon very specific advice as well about the nature of the construction that's proposed for this site, about the location of this site, and about the capability that would present in terms of potential interference with activity that occurs in this Parliament House. That is why we are taking this action. We're doing it very quickly.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese there. And Matt, has the law had broad support?
It certainly has, Naz. Things don't normally work that quickly here in Parliament House, but I think it's safe to say that it's been record time for this legislation to sail through both houses. 4 minutes in the lower house, 1 minute of debate in the Senate before it was passed. The opposition in favour of this legislation, with the Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson adding this.
It is important on sensitive national security issues like this that in the national interest we come together to resolve these issues. And this action the government is taking today is consistent with policies the previous government put in place with a similar intention and has now become necessary as a result of legal action, and the coalition is supporting the bill.
Senator James Paterson speaking a little earlier there. We have not heard from the Russian embassy. However, I think it's safe to say they will be very unhappy with this decision. We know that Russia still has a diplomatic presence here in the nation's capital, their existing embassy in the suburb of Griffith, about 5 minutes drive from Parliament House, as opposed to a couple of hundred metres down the road as this proposed site was meant to be.
Political reporter Matthew Doran there on ABC Radio right across Australia, streaming online and on the ABC Listen app. You're listening to The World Today. Well, the Socceroos have a big match in China tonight, playing against the reigning world champions Argentina. But questions are being asked about whether the friendly game should be held in China, with concerns the game will be used as propaganda. The federal opposition has hit out at the event, suggesting Football Australia is at risk of being unwittingly manipulated by China's government due to the political connections of the organisers. But sports fans argue it's a great opportunity for the Socceroos. More from Steph's Mail.
Argentina 2, Australia 1. The World Cup.
The Beijing friendly is a chance for the Socceroos to revisit their tense knockout match with the world's best Argentinians at last year's World Cup.
He's only gone and done it again.
Superstar Lionel Messi will be part of the lineup for the highly anticipated contest that also falls on the 70th birthday of Chinese President Xi Jinping. The federal opposition doesn't like the location or the timing. The Shadow Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, Claire Chandler, warns the organisers' links to the Chinese Communist Party put the Socceroos at risk of being caught up in a propaganda push. But former Chinese diplomat and political commentator Han Yang disagrees the match is a bad look.
We are still technically a friendly nation with China. It is our biggest trading partner. And to be invited into a sporting event, a cultural exchange, a sporting exchange, is of benefit to the bilateral relations, even though we do have political differences and also we are in a kind of a strategic competition with each other. Still, a more exchange is a good thing, not a bad thing.
The federal opposition is also arguing the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade helped make the game happen, and there's no way they would have overlooked it would fall on President Xi's birthday. Han Yang concedes the timing could be seen as a birthday present for President Xi, who's a big soccer fan.
He famously went to the English Premier League when he visited Britain, so he's a very famous soccer fan. So it is very possible that this event has something to do with a celebration of his birthday.
Human rights groups have also criticised the event, saying it's an insult to minorities abused by the Chinese government. Football Australia has told the ABC that the organisation's prime focus is on promoting the game of football and ensuring that their teams can perform at their best. ABC sports journalist Simon Smale says it's a chance for the Socceroos to really test their skills.
Anytime you get an opportunity to test yourself against the best, it is an opportunity that should be grabbed with both hands. And Argentina are undisputably the best. They are the current world champions. In their team, they have certainly the most recognisable player in the world in Lionel Messi.
Obviously, there's political questions being raised. Does that take the focus off the game for the team, for the Socceroos?
It's interesting because I think a lot of the players will be putting that to the back of their minds. It's not that they aren't aware of the political background and some of the questions that are being asked surrounding the match and the location that it's being played in, but I think their entire focus is on playing the game. The pitch is the same no matter where they are, I guess, around the world, and whether that's in Beijing or in Buenos Aires, it doesn't really matter to them specifically.
Officials from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade have previously said they helped Football Australia with logistics and travel advice, but denied the federal government has directly endorsed the event.
Stephanie Smale. Well, when you visit an unfamiliar space like a new shopping centre or an office block, you might be able to just look around, check a map, figure out where to go. But it's a bit more of a challenge if you are blind or vision impaired to navigate a new area. Various devices have been launched in recent times to help people deal with that problem, and one, designed by 3 Australians, has just received an international award. Bindi Maps is a mobile app that gives people directions in indoor spaces. One of the founders joined me earlier. Mladen Jovanovic, thank you very much for joining us. What exactly is Bindi Maps?
Bindi Maps is an indoor navigation system that's usable by people of all abilities. So the key thing that we're focusing on is making places accessible so people with disabilities are able to independently navigate unfamiliar indoor spaces.
So you need the app on your phone in order to navigate it. Like, can you talk us through the practicalities of actually getting into a new building, and what do you do then?
Yeah, sure. So you do need to have the app downloaded on your phone to have the accessible guidance spoken to you. So our customers would install Bindi Maps within their buildings. So these can be shopping centres, hospitals, airports. And then as you step foot into this building and you open Bindi Maps, it will automatically find where you are in the space. And then you can search for anything within that space. So that could be meeting rooms, it could be terminals at an airport, it could be wards in a hospital. If you toggle the accessible routes function, it will automatically reroute them away from stairs and other obstacles to make sure that they get lifts and accessible ramps to their destination. And this isn't just for people in wheelchairs. So if you have a pram, so if you're a parent walking with a pram through a shopping centre, this is of vital importance as well. So we are creating a system that's able to service everyone in the community, not just people who are sighted or people of one specific ability.
Why did you and 2 other Australians design this? Why was it so important for you?
So the original person that came up with the idea was our co-founder and CEO, Anna Wright. So Anna was diagnosed with a rare eye disorder where the doctor said, Anna, you're going to go blind. It's a matter of time. You need to start thinking about how you're going to navigate the world. And then Anna put her thinking hat on to figure out how do we solve this problem with technology. Anna went through an accelerator program where they developed a minimum viable product, which was really good at its job. And it actually got someone who's blind, who's never been in this particular building before, through the building, down the stairs, and she was able to buy herself a cup of coffee. And seeing the impact that we're able to make just on the blind and vision impaired community, it really got us thinking about what more could we do and what is the bigger impact that we could deliver with this solution.
How much of a problem is it for people with disability to be navigating new spaces?
It is a huge problem, and there are so many things that people don't even think about. Every building, it's mandated that they need to have, if it's publicly accessible, that they need to have, for example, Braille identifiers on restrooms. Now, the key question there is, how do people find the Braille if they've never been in the building? Braille is a great identifier, but it's not a navigation system. And we've had lived experience from people who are blind to tell us that they would dehydrate themselves before they leave their house out of fear of having to use a public restroom when they're out, because they would then need to ask someone, how do I use the restroom? Where's the flush button? How do I wash my hands? And we can extrapolate that into many other use cases. So the problem is really, really large.
And what are you hoping in the future that, I mean, let's face it, there are lots of apps now on kind of the market for people to use and lots of different navigational devices. What are you hoping you'll see in the space generally for people with disability going forward?
So I'm very optimistic about this space because there has been a lot of innovation over the past few years in the social impact space to help people with disabilities. I'm very hopeful, and I think that the world is going to completely transform, and it's going to be very accessible and inclusive for people of all abilities, allowing more people with disabilities to get into the workforce. It's going to change the way corporates operate. It's going to change the way impact reporting is done for organisations, and I'm very optimistic about the future.
Thank you very much for your time.
No problem at all, Naz. Thank you.
Let's turn to a breaking story now in Canberra. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe just made another statement to the Parliament and has repeated her allegation that a Liberal senator sexually assaulted her. For more, I'm joined by political reporter Stephanie Boris. Stephanie, can you tell us the latest here, please?
So we'll just take one step back to what occurred yesterday when Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe used parliamentary privilege to accuse Liberal Senator David Van of sexually harassing and sexually assaulting her. She was yelling these accusations across the chamber under parliamentary privilege. Straight away, Liberal Senator David Van denied those allegations. Now, after she made these comments in Parliament, she was required to withdraw the comments. That's to comply with parliamentary rules. But what has just happened now is that Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe has spoken in Parliament more generally about her experience. She hasn't spoken about any particular senator. What she said is that this wasn't an isolated incident. She's felt uncomfortable a number of times. She says that she could name a number of people that have inappropriately touched her and invaded her space, but she didn't go on to name those people. This was all said in the Senate just a short time ago. She also explained, though, that she will not be pursuing legal action against anyone in particular, that she's not going to the police. She says that's her choice. What she has suggested to the Senate is that she wants women to come forward with suggestions or ideas about how to make workplaces more safe. She's gone so far as to suggest that more security guards should be put on here at Parliament House. Now, let's just take a listen to a little bit of what Senator Lydia Thorpe has said in Parliament today, more generally about her experience while working here as a politician.
I experienced sexual comments and was inappropriately propositioned by powerful men. One man followed me and cornered me in a stairwell, and most of this was witnessed by staff and fellow members of Parliament. I was afraid to walk out of the office door. I would open the door slightly and check the coast was clear before stepping out.
Senator Lydia Thorpe there. And Steph, what has Senator Van had to say?
So Senator Van yesterday in Parliament said he rejected the allegations made under parliamentary privilege that were later withdrawn. He has actually spoken this morning, though, on Nine Radio, once again saying that the allegations put forward are not true. Let's take a listen.
Have you sexually assaulted Lydia Thorpe?
Absolutely no. I think I can say, I think with some surety, I think the only time I've ever even touched her would have been shaking her hand after her maiden speech. Nothing else, that's for sure.
Have you harassed Senator Thorpe?
No, I have not harassed her in any way, shape or form.
And Steph, where to from here? What happens here now?
So this now, well, Lydia Thorpe has said she's not going to the police and that she's not taking legal action, but she has made that comment. She wants a further conversation around how to make Parliament a safer place for women. So no doubt now there will be further conversations about if there is any moves or proposals that should be in place in order to follow through on what the Senator has said.
Stephanie Boris from our Parliament House Bureau there. Thank you very much for keeping us up to date. That's all from the World Today team for this Thursday. David Lipson will be here with you for PM, and we will be back at the same time tomorrow, so join us then. I'm Naz Campanella, right across Australia. You're listening to The World Today.
That was The World Today. You're back on ABC News Radio. I'm Dale Drinkwater. Let's get the latest headlines now. Here's Jessica Hayes.
Thanks, Dale. Official figures show Australia's unemployment rate has fallen. It dropped from 3.7% to 3.6% in May. Data shows almost 76,000 jobs were added to the economy last month. That's come as a shock to economists who were typically expecting 15,000 jobs to be added and the unemployment rate to remain steady. And the federal government has rushed through laws terminating the Russian government's lease of a parcel of land a stone's throw from Parliament House. The Russian Federation had plans to build a second embassy in Canberra on the doorstep of Capitol Hill. A long-running legal dispute in the federal court ended in Russia's favour, letting them keep the land. But the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, introduced legislation this morning which gets around that decision. The bill had bipartisan support, passing through the Senate in just 90 seconds. The government says it'll now take steps to stop any country from using the parcel of land for a diplomatic purpose. And federal police believe a global organised crime group using Canada as a launch pad is responsible for an attempt to traffic more than $1.5 billion worth of methamphetamine into Australia. 6 men have been charged after one of the biggest drug busts in Australia's history, with 6 tonnes of the highly active substance found in shipments of canola oil bottles destined for Melbourne. Victoria Police Assistant Commissioner Bob Hill said despite that, Australia remains an attractive destination for drug traffickers. And advocates say legislation that makes it easier for trans and gender diverse Queenslanders to change their birth certificates will be life-changing. Queensland Parliament last night passed a bill that will allow people to change the sex on their birth certificates without undergoing sexual reassignment surgery. Transcend Australia's Jeremy Wiggins has said it's a great step forward. And I'll have more news in half an hour.
Thank you, Jessica.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
It's Thursday, the 15th of June. Coming up on the program, federal police stop billions of dollars worth of methamphetamine from hitting the streets, and updated Closing the Gap data highlights the need for structural change. But first, to some breaking news. Senator Lydia Thorpe has just made a statement in the Senate regarding serious allegations she raised in the House under parliamentary privilege. Senator Thorpe yesterday accused Liberal Senator David Van of sexually harassing and assaulting her. Senator Van immediately rejected the accusations while in the Senate and described it as unfounded. Parliamentary privilege gives parliamentarians certain rights to speak freely within the Parliament without fear of prosecution. Effectively, that means they're exempt from ordinary law. He is Senator Thorpe speaking from Parliament moments ago.
So today I will speak about my experience in Parliament. When I started, I was a new senator. As all women that have walked the corridors of this building know, it is not a safe place. You are often alone in long corridors with no windows and in stairwells hidden from view where there are no cameras. This was my new workplace. This is a workplace women in this building know. I experienced sexual comments and was inappropriately propositioned by powerful men. One man followed me and cornered me in a stairwell, and most of this was witnessed by staff and fellow members of Parliament. No one witnessed what happened in the stairwell, as there are no cameras in stairwells. I know there are others that have experienced similar things and have not come forward in the interests of their careers and fear they would be presented to the world by the media in the same way that I have been today. There are different understandings of what amounts to sexual assault. What I experienced was being followed, aggressively propositioned, and inappropriately touched. I was afraid to walk out of the office door. I would open the door slightly and check the coast was clear before stepping out. It was to the degree that I had to be accompanied by someone whenever I walked inside this building. That is how the Greens supported me, and I thank them for that. To me, it was sexual assault. and the government at the time recognised it as such. At the time, I spoke to the President of the Senate about it. I spoke to my colleagues about it. I spoke to the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, about it during her inquiry. I spoke to senior leaders in the Liberal Party and was assured the Prime Minister was informed. At the time, I was convinced that the government believed me. Their actions in immediately moving the person's office reassured me that they understood the seriousness of what I experienced. I did not make the incident public at the time because it was during the time Brittany Higgins had made her experience in this building public. I did not want to have anything taken away from Brittany's experience and her bravery in coming forward.
That's Greens Senator Lydia Thorpe there speaking from Parliament under parliamentary privilege a short time ago. It comes after she yesterday accused Liberal Senator David Van of sexually harassing and assaulting her. At the time, Senator Van immediately rejected the accusations and described it as unfounded. Senator Van is expected to respond to these allegations, and we'll bring you this when it happens. And if this story has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline on 1800 RESPECT, which is 1800 737 732. To other news now, and federal police have stopped more than $1.5 billion worth of methamphetamine hitting the streets in one of the nation's largest ever drug busts. The AFP says 6 tonnes of the drug had been hidden in canola oil bottles. Reporter Christian Silva has the latest.
Yesterday in Melbourne, police carried out a series of raids and arrested 6 people, and that was the culmination of a 6-month operation into this drug syndicate. Taking you back to December, Canadian authorities detected some methamphetamine hidden in shipments of canola oil that were destined for Australia. A few months after that, police tracked a shipment to Australia, and then 2 other shipments never actually left Canada but were being tracked by authorities, and yesterday was when the big arrest happened. In total, $1.7 billion worth of methamphetamines was seized, and that equated to 6 tonnes worth. It's believed to be one of the biggest drug seizures in Australian history. Police obviously very happy with this and believe they've made quite a significant dent in the drug trade. Here at the Federal Police Headquarters this morning, there were Federal Police, also Victoria Police and Canadian authorities talking about the significance of this syndicate and these arrests. Unfortunately, the Mr. Bigs of this operation still remain unknown. Details about who's really behind this wasn't disclosed today, and police did say that their investigation into this syndicate is continuing. As I mentioned, 6 arrests were made, and police say they expect more to come in future. And that's not just arrests in Australia, that's also arrests back in Canada and possibly also in New Zealand. Police believe that this operation has been quite successful. They believe that it has made a significant impact on this syndicate, as well as drugs flowing through to the community here in Australia. Let's have a listen to what some police had to say earlier this morning.
We do not want to become white noise on that issue that impacts directly and indirectly on almost every Australian.
We need to do more to combat the scourge of methamphetamine in this state.
6 men have been charged and are facing court, and some of those men are going through the court in Melbourne today.
That's our reporter Christian Silva there. To New South Wales now, where a parliamentary inquiry has begun to examine around $1 billion spent on consultants over 5 years by the state government. It comes as the federal government looks at how it uses consultants after accounting firm PwC was caught leaking sensitive tax information to help their clients. Abigail Boyd is a Greens MP and the inquiry chair.
What we know for sure, because the Auditor General of New South Wales has told us very clearly, is that we don't really know very much about the spend from New South Wales government on these consultants. What we know is that we've spent at least $1 billion in the last 5 years on consultants from various government departments. But, she put out a really damning report in March that just said, there's so much that we don't know. She's very concerned about our use of consultants and the oversight, why we're using them, the effect it has on the public sector. There's so much there. I really think that what we're seeing at a federal level is just, the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the impact that these consultants are having on the public sector and on government integrity.
Yeah, and this is, I know from previous experience where we might try to talk about something, you'll say, well, what's the contract around that? And they'll go, commercial in confidence, can't possibly talk about it, which is, and then I always felt like, you're a government. I mean, you should be transparent. What's the contract? What's the deal?
It's our money.
It's our money.
This is the thing, and it's there is. Not only do we not get to see the outcome of this money, we have some of the contracts we're uncovering right now, they're for the most ridiculous things, and they're giving them millions of dollars to PwC, KPMG, EY, Deloitte, to just produce the most, in some cases, ridiculous products and advice. But what we're doing in this inquiry, we're starting with New South Wales Health, but this is going to go for a long time, this inquiry, because the more we look, the more we're finding of just this business model where these consultants are embedding themselves in government and then using their privileged information and position to then create more work for themselves and for their corporate clients. It is everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And that's the sort of softer end of it. I mean, if the PwC, what was alleged there, where PwC was using the information to help their clients, is definitely a step too far. The step that would seem acceptable is that, well, we're in here, so we now know how to get the next contract, but also we can tell another firm about other stuff and just keep the whole thing going.
Yeah, and maybe we get, as a consulting firm, we get some of our people to go and sit on government boards and agencies, and maybe we have a revolving door where they get senior positions within these government departments and then come back to the consulting firms for a bit. Maybe that way we've got this embedding of this expertise in government, but this information flow that goes straight back to the consulting firm. Then they get to make the profit. It is actually their business model. What we're seeing at a federal level is not an aberration.
No, and it's also it's part of, again, what has been the fashion through any form of government in the last 20 to 30 years. We will announce cutbacks. We'll look at, we've got rid of spending. We've got rid of all these areas of the public service. And then we'll be a little coy about how much we're spending on the consultants to replace the public servants.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And when we look at it, what we do know is that we've got pretty much an experience for the people of New South Wales of worse government services. We had not reduced our overall spend on those essential services, and yet these other private players are making a fortune. And we've also gutted the public sector at the same time. We don't have the expertise we used to have. So we're increasingly reliant on these massive companies.
Hearing begins today and will go till when?
So we've got our first hearing today. This is going to be a long-running inquiry. It's going to go for at least a year. We're starting with health. We've got about 3 hearing days for health. And we're looking at health because the Auditor General found that they really didn't report their expenditure. And they've got this, devolved governance system where they've got all of these local health districts that are out there paying for consultants, using consultants with very little oversight, and it's not being reported back.
That's Greens MP Abigail Boyd speaking with James Valentine about a state government inquiry that was set up to examine around $1 billion spent on consultants over 5 years by the New South Wales government. It is Thursday, the 15th of June. It's just gone 12:45 in the east, 12:15 in the centre, and 10:45 a.m. in the west. Let's get a check of the latest headlines now. The unemployment rate drops to 3.6% as 76,000 jobs are added to the economy. Police have charged 6 men with sourcing methamphetamine from a global crime syndicate, trying to traffic 6 tonnes of it into Australia. New laws to block the Russian government from building an embassy near Parliament House in Canberra have passed the Senate in an urgent move by the federal government today. And high concentrations of an essential element for all biological processes on Earth have been detected in ice on Saturn. A new Productivity Commission data tracking the federal government's progress in ending systemic disadvantage for First Nations Australians shows overall the gap isn't closing. The fresh data, which monitors life outcomes across 19 areas, has delivered mixed results, with incremental shifts across a range of areas, but currently only 4 goals are on track to be met by 2031. While many areas are worsening, including the incarceration rates of adults and developmental school readiness, there have been modest improvements around early childhood education and employment rates. Aranda Luritja woman Catherine Little is the chief executive of the peak body of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, also known as SNAKE.
Today's results show what we were expecting, and that is that governments are moving too slow, and we heard that and a great recognition from the minister in her statements coming into this particular segment, where she said more needs to be done on this. We do need to get some fire under it. We're seeing an incredible shift in the willingness of our communities to get on board. We're seeing some excitement in our communities wanting to come to the table. We're seeing excitement in our allies and the non-government services saying, look, how do we get on board with this? How do we start shifting the trajectories? What we're not seeing are the big fundamental system shifts that make change happen. And again, you only have to look at children for that. The outcomes relating to child protection are getting worse, and our children are not school ready.
Because what I do point out, though, is the number of Indigenous children in out-of-home care, that's on the rise. But am I right in saying the number of substantiated child protection notifications, that's decreasing across the board? Is it fair to say this data does show some mixed results in that space?
Oh, look, it always shows the mixed results. And again, what part of that data, and again, we haven't done an analysis on it, but one could speculate that some of the reasons you'll see that is the closing the gap push has been saying, take the child placement principle seriously. It's been saying take your commitment to Aboriginal people and working with Aboriginal people and communities seriously, which means you're likely to get changes in notifications and substantiations. But again, the analysis on that I don't have.
Do you think this latest data, though, challenges some suggestions we've heard from some members of Parliament in particular, who have previously commented that First Nations children are more likely to be subject to sexual abuse?
Oh, look, I don't think you need to look at this data to challenge that. Australia's just released a massive report on the maltreatment of children, and that shows a very different story. And again, what we know from the Royal Commissions into child sexual abuse, but also in the removal of children, is that nationally you are more likely as an Aboriginal child to be sexually assaulted in out-of-home care. The stats are very different for Aboriginal children. Our children are harmed at an alarming rate when they are removed from from their children. So that's why they say children need to be placed within their communities, because they're safer when they have families that can look out for them.
And Catherine, you've been speaking to us about this need, I guess, for a fundamental shift, particularly in the way we think about this and the way we deal with these issues. You want to see all levels of government, just touching on what you just said, all levels of government prioritising keeping Indigenous children with their family members. How do you go about doing that?
Oh, look, one of them is the policy settings, right? So we know we've got the Closing the Gap agreement in place that that has all the drivers you need for successful policy. What we need now is a will to implement. We need to fire up those ambitions. We need to move faster. So that means that we're not only working with Aboriginal people about what is happening on the ground, where are the gaps, who needs to be delivering these services, how do we work out if they're working, and how do we start moving funding into the right area. Again, when we talk about things like child protection, $6 billion a year, a fraction of that goes into prevention and strengthening families, and that's across the board, not only for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. What we know is the majority of those services are delivered by organisations that are not Indigenous controlled. These are not our stats. The fraction that does get through sees different results. We get better outcomes and we get them faster. So that's what we need to do. We need all layers of governments recognising what their roles are, creating those pathways and really firing up those ambitions.
I've got to tell you, I can't help but feel, discussing this morning, a bit of a sense of deja vu. You know, we always seem to be coming across these reports that come out. I don't remember one where I've said we're achieving our Closing the Gap targets. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong there, but it just seems like it's every single time we are just not meeting these targets and not meeting the vast majority of them, which is the case in the report we're seeing today.
Absolutely.
Are you optimistic about the road ahead? You've called for a fundamental shift in the way we think about this, but do you think that's actually going to be happening? Because I hazard a guess that we might be discussing this again down the track. This is not the last time we'll be discussing that we haven't met our Closing the Gap targets. You know?
This will not be the last time we discuss this. Absolutely, that is truth, because it takes a significant amount of work, and it takes all layers of governments and all levels of government to be firing simultaneously to get systemic change. Again, child protection is a really easy one to talk about. I was at the ABSET conference here in New South Wales yesterday, and everyone was talking about this broken child protection system. Here's what fundamental reform looks like. The child protection system isn't broken. It was designed to remove children from families. In order to stop that, you have to flip it and you have to say, no, what we need to do is strengthen families so that we don't even have to have this conversation about child protection. But again, I can't stay, and I do no favours to the communities that I represent if I stay in that negative space and go, this is going to happen again and again. What I was thinking about was what it is going to feel like when we can have these conversations and say, guess what? The stats changed.
That's the Chief Executive of Snake, Catherine Little, speaking with Thomas O'Reilly. Overseas now, and in Ukraine, intense fighting is being reported across various fronts. Authorities say their counter-offensive has liberated a number of settlements. In southern Ukraine, a visit by the UN nuclear chief to the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant had to be pushed back for security reasons and because of heavy fighting. The BBC's Mayeni Jones sent this report from Kyiv.
Rafael Grossi, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, was due to visit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant this week, but he's had to postpone his trip indefinitely for safety reasons. And that's because the region of Zaporizhzhia is one of the front lines of Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces. The fact that Mr. Grossi is unable to visit the nuclear plant at a time when he says he needs to check whether the water levels of the cooling pools around the nuclear plants that were affected by the damage to Kakhovka Dam last week. He's concerned that water levels, there's a discrepancy in the water levels that have been reported versus what's been measured. The fact that he's unable to visit that site, I think, indicates just how fraught the security situation is across Ukraine at the moment.
That's the BBC's Mayeni Jones there reporting from Kyiv. It's time for some sport news now, and we're joined by Brittany Klein.
Hello. A motion for the South Australian government to hand over documents relating to the Live Golf tournament have passed in the Upper House of Parliament. The bid by Greens MLC Tammy Franks will overcome commercial in confidence protections and compel the release of details such as payments and agreements. The SA government has continually refused to comment on how much it spent on the event, which was backed by Saudi Arabia. The Human Rights Watch has criticised the tournament of sports washing to improve the Saudi government's international image. Meanwhile, 7 Australian golfers will tee off in the opening round of the men's US Open tonight. It's the first time in 75 years that the tournament is being played in Los Angeles. Australia's Jason Day says he's excited to be playing in the shadow of Hollywood.
It's unbelievable that the landscape and the way it looks in downtown, Beverly Hills and LA, that we have a course like this, which is unique. So I'm excited to get out there and see how what the course provides for us.
Nick Kyrgios has revealed he spent time in a psychiatric hospital in London after losing Wimbledon in 2019. Kyrgios lost to Rafael Nadal in the second round that year. Kyrgios opened up on a dark period in his life in a new episode of the documentary Breakpoint.
There was times I wasn't in the best headspace. Tennis world's kind of painted me as this crazy villain. If I win Wimbledon, it's like a middle finger to everyone.
Help is available with Lifeline on 13 11 14. Meanwhile, Rinky Hijikata and Chris O'Connell have reached the quarterfinal stage on the ATP Tour in Europe. Hijikata is through to the last round on the grass court event in the Netherlands after a 2-6, 7-5, 6-3 win over Switzerland's Marc-Andrea Hussler. O'Connell is set to climb the world rankings after beating Italy's Lorenzo Sonego 7-6, 6-3 in the Stuttgart Open round of 16. It'll be O'Connell's 4th ATP quarterfinal this year. In the NRL, St George Illawarra has appointed Shane Flanagan to take over as head coach starting next year on a 3-year deal. Flanagan was the coach at the Cronulla Sharks from 2010 to 2013 and again from 2015 to 2018, but was suspended in 2014 due to players taking banned supplements. He is currently the assistant coach at the Manly Sea Eagles and will stay there until the end of the season. The Dragons are sitting last on the premiership ladder with 4 wins and 10 losses this season. Switching to AFL, and Richmond's Ryan Mansell will face the AFL's appeals board tonight. The Tigers are appealing Mansell's 3-game ban for a bump that concussed Fremantle's James Aish. Hawthorn has also decided to challenge captain James Sicily's 3-match suspension for a tackle that left Brisbane midfielder Hugh McCluggage with a concussion. He'll front the appeals board on Monday after Hawthorn's bye. Western Bulldogs coach Luke Beveridge says the club is doing everything it can to keep duo Tim English and Aaron Norton at the club. Both players have been linked back to Western Australia, with the Eagles reportedly keen to make big moves when English becomes a free agent next season. Beveridge says the club is on top of the situation.
We're doing everything we can to make sure that we're in a position to retain Tim. I think Aaron's been spoken about as well, and we'll just pull out all stops to make sure that the boys know that we believe that they belong here.
And that's the latest in ABC Sport.
Thank you for that, Brittany. That's Brittany Klein, and Brittany will be back with us in just under half an hour or so with another sports update. We are coming up to a 5-minute news bulletin, but before that, let's just get a quick look at the markets. The ASX 200 is up 0.27% to 7,180. The Australian dollar is fairly flat against the other currencies this morning, buying 67.8 US cents and 53.7 euro cents. Let's get a check of the weather around the capital cities now. Let's start in Brisbane, where it's sunny and currently 20 degrees. Sydney, also sunny and it's 17 degrees, just one below your top of 18. Canberra, it's partly cloudy and you've almost reached your top of 13 degrees. Melbourne, a shower or two and currently 14 degrees. Hobart, mostly sunny and 15, that's your top. Adelaide, possible shower, 15 degrees, 2 below your top of 17. Perth, showers today, 1 below your top of 19, currently at 18 degrees. Darwin, sunny and 31 degrees, reaching for 33 degrees today. As I mentioned, we're coming up to a 5-minute news bulletin and then we'll have more analysis after that. Stay with us.
ABC News with Jessica Hayes. The unemployment rate has fallen, surprising economist. Daniel Ziffer reports.
Nearly 76,000 jobs were added to the economy last month, sending the unemployment rate down to 3.6%. The result is an indicator of the strength of the economy, and it shocked economists who had tipped the figure would remain at 3.7%, with a much smaller number of jobs created. Figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show the number of people employed in Australia has topped 14 million for the first time, and the ratio of employment to the population is 64.5%, a record high.
A Sydney court has heard that from the moment Hillsong founder Brian Houston heard his father admit to sexually abusing a young boy, his sole focus was to protect the church's reputation. Jamie McKinnell reports.
Brian Houston has pleaded not guilty to concealing his father Frank Houston's abuse of a 7-year-old boy in the 1970s. He says he had a reasonable excuse for not reporting the matter, that the victim, who was aged in his 30s by the time the abuse came to light, didn't want the police involved. In a closing address, prosecutor Gareth Harrison told the court Hillsong had a culture of silence, and the entrenched reverence to Frank Houston fostered protection of those in power. He told the magistrate Brian Houston knew he could control the narrative by elevating the matter to the national executive but not outside authorities, and his only focus was protecting the church.
Police have charged 6 men with sourcing methamphetamine from a global crime syndicate trying to traffic 6 tonnes into Australia. More than $1.5 billion worth of the highly addictive substance was found hidden in shipments of canola oil bottles travelling from Canada to Melbourne, where the men will face court in the coming days. Victoria Police Assistant Commissioner Bob Hill says they're still investigating the syndicate behind the attempt.
We will pursue every avenue of inquiry to complete this investigation. It is just begun. There is no doubt this syndicate will take a massive monetary hit as a result of this outcome, which is crucial as we work together to have these syndicates held to account.
A Queensland coroner has outlined the framework for an inquest into a deadly shooting on the Western Downs late last year. Alex Brewster reports.
Constables Rachel McCrow and Matthew Arnold and civilian Alan Dare were gunned down by religious-motivated extremists at a remote Williambilla property in December. A pre-inquest hearing in Brisbane has been told 4 police officers attended the farm and were shot at without warning by residents Nathaniel, Gareth and Stacey Train. Nathaniel Train had breached the COVID-closed Queensland-New South Wales border a year earlier in a car stacked with guns. The inquest will examine this as well as what information police had on the trio. It's expected to start in early 2024.
Overseas, the US Federal Reserve has hinted it may raise interest rates 2 more times this year, even as it left the target range unchanged earlier today at 5 to 5.25%. The decision came after 10 consecutive hikes since March 2022 to slow the economy and snuff out high inflation. The Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, says the labour market has surprised many analysts in recent years with what he's described as its extraordinary resilience.
It's just remarkable, and that's really, if you think about it, that's what's driving. It's job creation, it's wages moving up, it's supporting spending, which in turn is supporting hiring, and it's really the engine, it seems, that is driving the economy.
A popular Hong Kong protest song is no longer available on several major music streaming sites and social media platforms. It comes after Hong Kong's government sought an injunction to ban the tune. Glory to Hong Kong rose to popularity during the 2019 pro-democracy protests and became an unofficial protest anthem. Hong Kong, once a bastion of free speech and expression, has come under tighter scrutiny by Beijing after the unrest in 2019. Since then, its political system has undergone a major overhaul to ensure that only patriots loyal to Beijing can hold office. And in Sport 7, golfers will tee off in the opening round of the Men's US Open tonight. It's the first time in 75 years the tournament is being played in Los Angeles. Australia's Jason Day says he's excited to be playing in the shadow of Hollywood.
It's unbelievable that the landscape and the way it looks in downtown, Beverly Hills and LA, that we have a course like this, which is unique. So I'm excited to get out there and see how what the course provides for us.
And you're up to date with the latest ABC News. For more news anytime, you can download the ABC Listen app.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Good afternoon on this Thursday, the 15th of June. I'm Dale Drinkwater. Coming up this half hour, Japan's plans to discharge treated radioactive wastewater into the sea is dividing Pacific nations. And the European Union approves the world's first rules around artificial intelligence. We find out what it means for Australia. First, a bill to stop Russia from building a new embassy next to Parliament House in Canberra has passed Parliament. The move gets around a federal court ruling in favour of Russia retaining its lease on land adjacent to Parliament House. Political reporter Matthew Doran is following developments from Canberra.
This dates back to August of last year when the National Capital Authority, which manages the Parliamentary Triangle precinct and the areas of national significance here in Canberra, effectively invoked a use it or lose it clause that related to this parcel of land just down the hill from where we are here in Parliament House, which back in 2011 had been signed over to the Russian government for the construction of a new embassy. Part of that agreement was that construction needed to be finished within a number of years, and the MCA was of the opinion that that hadn't happened. There hadn't been enough work done on the site and tried to tear up that lease agreement. It then went to the federal court with the Russian government challenging that decision, and late last month the federal court found in favour of the Russian government, saying that the Russian government and its embassy could continue being built on that parcel of land just a stone's throw from where we are here in Canberra. That's prompted urgent discussions among members of the government, in particular the National Security Agencies and the National Security Committee of Federal Cabinet, leading to this legislation being introduced to Federal Parliament this morning. Something of a surprise. It was kept very much under wraps, but Anthony Albanese says that the advice to his government was that this development should not go ahead and that this legislation was needed to urgently tear up that lease and effectively overrule that decision that had been made by the federal court.
And it's based upon very specific advice as well about the nature of the construction that's proposed for this site, about the location of this site, and about the capability that would present in terms of potential interference with activity that occurs in this Parliament House. That is why we are taking this action. We're doing it very quickly.
That's the Prime Minister speaking earlier this morning. Few things happen very quickly in this building, Ros, but certainly this legislation has sailed through 4 minutes of debate in the lower house, 1 minute of debate in the Senate when the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, Liberal Senator James Paterson, had this to say.
It is important on sensitive national security issues like this that in the national interest we come together to resolve these issues. And this action the government is taking today is consistent with policies the previous government put in place with a similar intention and has now become necessary as a result of legal action, and the Coalition is supporting the bill.
And have we heard from the Russian embassy on this yet, Matt?
At this stage, no comment from the Russian embassy. However, you can assume that they will be pretty annoyed by this decision, given previous statements about the initial decision to tear up that lease and the court case that followed. It's important to point out that the National Capital Authority, in making its initial decision, said it had nothing to do with the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. However, I think it's also safe to say that in light of what has happened over the last year or so with that invasion, this is the decision that the federal government has come to today. It's also important to point out that Russia still does have a diplomatic presence here in the national capital, in the suburb of Griffith, which is a few kilometres away from where we are here in Parliament House, as opposed to this current proposal, which has now been torn up a couple of hundred metres away from this building.
That's political reporter Matthew Doran speaking with Ros Childs. To more news now, as Japan prepares to release treated nuclear water into the Pacific Ocean, there remains heated debate over the safety of its plans. PNG's Prime Minister James Marape this week came out in support, while other Pacific countries remain opposed. But with Japan seemingly forging ahead, time is fast running out for the region to form consensus. Dubravka Volodya reports.
Local fishermen, neighboring countries, and Pacific leaders have all come out against Japan's planned nuclear wastewater release. But authorities remain committed to the plan. Tests are underway at the now disabled Fukushima plant using fresh water before the treated nuclear water is released into the Pacific Ocean. The plant's operator, TEPCO, and Japan say the release is the safest and most pragmatic way to dispose of the more than 1 million tons of nuclear wastewater currently stored in hundreds of tanks on the site. But not everyone agrees.
We continue to see Japan as going full speed ahead.
Dr. Bob Richmond, a research professor from the University of Hawaii, is one of the experts advising the Pacific Islands Forum.
We continue to raise questions about the science. To this point, we remain concerned, and many of the issues that we've brought up have not been adequately addressed to our satisfaction.
The water has been used to cool melted reactors after a tsunami caused a nuclear disaster at the Fukushima plant in 2011. Once released into the Pacific, TEPCO says the treated water will have most of the radioactive elements removed through a treatment called ALPS. The only element that can't be removed is tritium, a radioactive form of hydrogen that's present in the environment, including water. But TEPCO says in a video, the treated water will be diluted further with seawater and will be safe.
We will thoroughly implement safety measures. For example, during discharge, we will continually monitor tritium concentrations as the water is being diluted and measure concentrations in discharge water daily. Furthermore, for the time being, we will measure the water in the vertical shaft prior to discharge. When discharging ALPS-treated water into the sea, which is a part of the decommissioning process, we will carefully engage in each step while prioritizing safety.
Despite these assurances, Dr. Richmond says the presence of tritium in the water is a concern. He says his team of Pacific Forum experts have raised concerns with Japan and the International Atomic Energy Agency, which acts as an observer and reviews the data, and asked for further clarification.
Tritium is a concern. The jury is still out on it. There's about 7 to 11 different radionuclides where we don't see adequate ability to measure. Their monitoring and their assessment is focused on detection, not protection.
Despite these warnings from experts advising Pacific leaders, the leaders themselves seem to be divided. Earlier this year, Forum Secretary General Henry Puna called for the discharge to be delayed until all parties verify its safety. But this week, PNG's Prime Minister came out in support of Japan, saying that if Japan is confident it can safely release the water, it should be allowed to do so. In a statement, he said,
Papua New Guinea is of the view that Japan, with its high compliance to international standards and regulations, is meeting the requirements in managing nuclear waste and is at the point where, if it is confident that it can safely release treated water back into the natural environment, it should be allowed to do so.
As United Nations body, the IAEA has published a report saying Japan's measurements of the treated water are accurate after testing samples of the treated water in its labs. Meanwhile, third-party labs in a number of countries, including France and Switzerland, also checked samples. A nuclear engineer from the University of New South Wales, Dr. Patrick Burr, says those findings should give people peace of mind.
I mean, it's good news. It's always good to get confirmation that what the local authorities are doing is being approved internationally, but it wasn't unexpected. You expect a high level of checks and balances even before you get inspection from the IAEA.
The IAEA plans to publish additional findings soon, including from samples collected from the environment, such as seawater and fish.
Dubravka Voloda reporting there. The ABC has contacted the IAEA for comment. Let's get a check of the headlines now. The unemployment rate has dropped to 3.6% as 76,000 jobs are added to the economy. Questions are being raised about whether the Socceroos friendly match with world champions Argentina should go ahead tonight in China. The federal opposition has hit out at the event, suggesting Football Australia is at risk of being unwittingly manipulated by China's government. And new laws to block the Russian government from building an embassy near Parliament House in Canberra have passed the Senate in an urgent move by the federal government this morning. Members of the European Parliament have voted to approve a draft of the world's first set of comprehensive rules for artificial intelligence. The vote is one of the last steps before the rules become law, which would be a model for other places working on similar regulations. The effort by Brussels to draw up guardrails for AI has become more urgent after AI tools such as ChatGPT exploded into global consciousness. To find out how these new regulations may affect Australia, here is Professor Chris Marsden from Monash University's Faculty of Law.
So this is the first generic law affecting AI, so it cuts right across the whole of society. People will be relieved to know there have been rules about medical devices and education and policing and other areas of AI before, but this is actually right across the whole piece. So if there's a new technology being used like ChatGPT, it would regulate that. It would regulate technologies that are introduced kind of across society. So if you get a new, more intelligent chatbot, for instance, that would be one of the types of technologies that would be regulated in future by the AI Act once it finally is passed, which is a while yet.
And regulated how?
So there will be three forms of regulation. Effectively, it's a pyramid. So you have low, medium, high regulation. High risk would be the kinds of technologies like live facial recognition. You know, you're being filmed as you go into a store or a public transport station. That would be a high-risk form. In fact, that might even be banned, depending on how the negotiations in Europe go. And then low risk would be something which would be a very trivial change required by AI, like filtering your spam email, for instance, might be a low risk form of AI. So yeah, it's a kind of pyramid between kind of low, medium and high risk.
And they were passed with urgency. What does that tell us about how significant these reforms are in Europe?
Well, the European reforms are slightly misleading because they've been going on now for 2.5, almost 3 years. There might be a final passage of the actual law itself in 6 months or so, but most people overlook that it's not been enforced for a further 3 years. So they're claiming urgency, but this will not be enforced until 2027 probably.
Right. And AI companies have themselves been pushing for regulations. Why is that?
Well, the AI companies have been pushing, obviously they're lobbying on their own behalf, and they've been pushing for a type of regulation which wouldn't have teeth. So they've been claiming that AI is dramatically different and and that artificial general intelligence would be where AI can really think for itself, is coming, and that the sky is falling. So they're actually inducing panic in the policymakers about what should be done. And I think they're doing that for their own aims, to kind of confuse the policymakers about this very specific law, which is actually, as I said, been planning for 3 years. So I would not take some of their warnings too seriously.
Does this have any impact or influence on Australia and its regulations around AI?
It has huge interest for Australia in 3 ways. The first is that most of the really, really big AI companies are the companies we're all very familiar with, Google and Apple and Meta and Amazon and so on, and they work globally, and they will conform to basically a minimum cost way of complying with the law. The European market is much larger than the Australian market, 500 million people. So they will be likely to conform to that law, and that will impact Australia itself. Second reason is that Australia is talking about regulatory alignment with Europe and also the United States, albeit that they will have different approaches to AI. And the third is that the Australian government is right now consulting until the end of July on what should be done to provide an Australian generic kind of cross-society framework for AI. So yeah, this is big news for Australia right now.
So say Australia can't come to its own consensus around regulating AI, what kind of consequences could we see there?
Well, there will be a difficulty in coming to complete consensus, because obviously some people think there shouldn't be any regulation at all. Some people think that certain things should be banned. So we're not going to achieve consensus. But if Australia doesn't adopt any new generic rules at all, it will end up having to follow whatever the companies actually decide to implement. The world doesn't stop just because government doesn't set a rule. And so there will be changes happening down the line. And those changes will be according to whichever the companies think is appropriate of US or European, or dare I say it, Chinese laws. So there will be regulation of AI. If Australia chooses not to adopt any regulation itself, then it will have essentially someone else's regulation imposed on it, because of the nature of the company's need to work internationally.
Is that risky?
Is it risky for whom? It's probably risky for everybody. Is it risky for you and I as Australian residents? Yes, it is. But equally, where we sit currently is that we have no regulation in place. And we've seen all kinds of live demonstrations of AI which have been quite risky. Obviously, I'm a professor, and I can look up on ChatGPT what my biography is, and I will see this very impressive biography of this guy called Professor Chris Marsden, who has a range of publications which are not mine, which are fictitious, and who has worked in different universities than I have. So the fact that that thing was allowed to go live when it was clearly going to mislead us, it was going to be fake news, is a pretty spectacular illustration of what happens when you have no regulation in place and the companies can just play with us, essentially.
That's Professor Chris Marsden from Monash University's Faculty of Law, speaking to me a little earlier about the European Parliament voting to approve a draft of the world's first set of comprehensive rules for artificial intelligence. To Poland now, and that country's set up what it calls a crisis team to tackle threats to its fish population after nearly a ton of dead fish were found floating in a part of the River Oder in the southwest. Last year, an EU report into a similar incident said it was a stark reminder of how pollution, biodiversity loss and climate change have dire consequences and mustn't be allowed to happen again. The BBC's Adam Easton has more.
On Saturday and Sunday, close to a ton of dead fish were found floating on the surface of what is called the Gliwice Canal, which is a canal which runs from the Upper Silesia region in Poland, which is famous for being home to the heartland of the coal mining industry for many centuries now. This canal feeds into the River Oder, which is one of Poland's longest rivers and forms, in fact, most of the border between Poland and Germany. So the discovery of these fish, this ecological sort of disaster, is a warning and a sign that we could have a repeat of last year's much greater ecological disaster of fish die-outs in the River Oder.
Do scientists actually know what caused the deaths of all of these fish?
Well, we've had Polish government reports, we've had German government reports, and we've had the European Union Environmental Agency report, which stated that they believe that these die-offs, these fish are being killed by what are known as toxic algal blooms. So algae in the river, which is formed primarily by a higher salt content.
That's the BBC's Adam Easton there. Let's get a check of all the sports news, and we're joined by Brittany Klein.
Hello. Questions are being raised about whether the Socceroos friendly match with world champions Argentina should go ahead tonight in China. The federal opposition has hit out the event, suggesting that Football Australia is at risk of being unwittingly manipulated by the Chinese government. That's due to the timing of the event falling on Chinese President Xi Jinping's birthday and the political connections of the organisers. But former Chinese diplomat and political commentator Han Yang disagrees the match is a bad look.
We are still technically a friendly nation with China. It is our biggest trading partner. A cultural exchange, a sporting exchange is of benefit to the bilateral relations. Even though we do have political differences, it's still more exchange is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Two AFL and Lions veterans Daniel Rich and Jack Gunston have ruled themselves out of selection, saying their current form doesn't warrant a place in the team. They'll now enter a training program to boost their fitness rather than joining the reserves. Coach Chris Fagan says the pair approached him earlier in the week, unhappy about the way they were playing.
Both those guys are champion footballers, so you want to give, you sort of respect that fact, and you want to give them a bit of time to get back to playing their best football and trust them to get there. But they recognise it in themselves. That's the great discussion we had on Monday, and I'm very confident that those boys will get back and play some good footy.
Meanwhile, Hawthorn captain James Sicily and Richmond's Ryan Mansell will appeal against the respective three-match bans they were handed at the AFL Tribunal earlier this week. Sicily was suspended for a tackle that concussed Brisbane midfielder Hugh McCluggage, while Mansell was found guilty of rough conduct for a bump that left Fremantle's James Aish with a concussion. Mansell's appeal will be held tonight, while Sicily's will be heard on Monday night after the Hawks' bye. The GWS Giants are set to recall a trio of big names for Saturday's clash with Fremantle at Giants Stadium. Reigning best and fairest winner Sam Taylor, starred midfielder Josh Kelly and speedy defender Isaac Cumming have all recovered from injuries and are in line to be included for the matchup with the Dockers. Coach Adam Kingsley says it'll be a big boost to those who've stepped up in their absence.
The addition of those sort of players, Sam Taylor, Isaac Cumming, Josh Kelly, those guys who have been shouldering responsibility continue to do so, and we're just adding these experienced players to our group.
Cam Smith and Jason Day head a 7-strong contingent of Aussie golfers in the field for the US Open starting tonight in LA. It'll be the first major since the shock merger between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf. Day says he's looking forward to the LIV defectors returning.
You need the likes of some of those guys that went over to LIV, and a lot of those guys are still my friends. So I'm happy for them to come back. And I know that they took a risk to go over there, but, other guys might think differently.
And back home, a motion for the South Australian government to hand over documents relating to the LIV Golf tournament has passed in the Upper House of Parliament. The bid by Greens MLC Tammy Franks will overcome commercial in confidence protections and compel the release of details such as payments and agreements. The SA government has continuously refused to comment on how much it spent on the event, which was backed by Saudi Arabia. The Human Rights Watch has criticised the tournament of sports washing to improve the Saudi government's international image. And Dale, that's the latest in ABC Sport.
Thank you, Brittany Klein. Brittany will be back with another sports update in just under half an hour. As we have been reporting today, the unemployment rate has dropped 3.6% with 76,000 jobs added to the economy. That rate of 3.6% is only just above the 48-year low of 3.4%, which was reached in October 2022. Let's take a quick look at the markets. The ASX 200 is up 0.25% to 7,179. The Australian dollar is buying 67.8 US cents, 53.7 Great British pence. Let's get a check of the weather now. Starting in Brisbane, where it is sunny and currently 21 degrees, one below your top of 22. Sydney, sunny and 17 degrees. Again, one below your top of 18. Canberra, partly cloudy and 13. That's your top for today. Melbourne, a shower or two. Currently 14 degrees, two below your top of 16. Hobart, mostly sunny and 15. That's your top today. Adelaide, a possible shower. Currently 15 degrees, two below your top of 17. Perth, showers and 19 degrees. That's your top for today. And Darwin, it's sunny where you are. It's currently 32 degrees. That is one below your top of 33 degrees. It is time now for a 5-minute national news bulletin.
ABC News with Jessica Hayes. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe has used parliamentary privilege to allege she's been followed, aggressively propositioned and inappropriately touched while working at Parliament House. Senator Thorpe has not identified any person as responsible for the conduct. It comes a day after she used parliamentary privilege to accuse Liberal Senator David Van of harassing and sexually assaulting her, which he denies. Speaking in the chamber, Senator Thorpe says Parliament House is not a safe place for women.
Silence is violence. And yesterday I could not stay silent. As someone who has knowingly made me feel unsafe, had the gall to stand up in front of Parliament and preach about protecting women.
Australia's official unemployment rate has dropped down to 3.6% despite the impact of aggressive interest rate rises on the economy. Senior business correspondent Peter Ryan has more.
According to these seasonally adjusted figures for May, the economy appears to be surprisingly resilient despite those aggressive rate hikes to tame runaway inflation. The jobless rate falling slightly to 3.6%. It had been expected to hold at 3.7%. Now, we keep hearing about the employment boom weakening, but in May, nearly 76,000 jobs were added to the economy. Now, that increase in employment saw the number of employed people in Australia reach 14 million for the first time, around 1 million more people than who were employed before the pandemic.
South Australians will today learn more about how their state's gone from a predicted surplus of more than $200 million to a $249 million deficit for the current financial year. Imogen Hain reports.
The Treasurer is blaming the turnaround of nearly $500 million on extra spending in health, child protection and on the River Murray flooding event. There's been a raft of health initiatives we know about already that feature in today's budget, stretching from upgrades to the existing Women's and Children's Hospital to $132 million for 4 programs designed to try to keep people out of hospitals. Families with school-aged children will benefit from an extension to the $100 material and services discount, and an extra $20 million has been allocated for facelifts and upgrades to public schools across the state.
Northern Territory Police continue to investigate a series of ram raids that occurred overnight in Darwin's northern suburbs. Erin Archer reports. Police received reports just after 2 a.m. that 2 vehicles had been stolen from a residence on Progress Drive in Nightcliff. The alleged offenders used the stolen vehicles to ram raid 3 businesses in Jingli, Anula and Casuarina. One of the vehicles allegedly crashed into a parked vehicle and the occupants fled the scene. Police then identified the second vehicle at about 6:20 a.m. and arrested 4 male youths. They're expected to be charged today and investigations continue to identify the remaining offenders. The WA government says it's planning to keep operating a youth detention facility at a maximum security adult prison for longer than first planned. Here's state political reporter Kian Burke.
Unit 18 houses more than a dozen inmates in an isolated part of Casuarina Prison. The government says they're too difficult to manage at Banksia Hill Juvenile Detention Centre. It was described as a temporary measure and the unit was due to close in the first half of this year. But WA's new Corrective Services Minister, Paul Papalea, has told ABC Radio Perth Unit 18 will remain open to help reduce disruptions at Banksia Hill.
The thing is, we can't close it until there's an alternative for those particular individuals. So we'll look at I think they just have to be there.
At least 20 suicide attempts have been recorded at Unit 18 over the last year, which Mr Papalea says is a result of the detainees' complex issues.
To sport, and GWS Giants coach Adam Kingsley admits there are concerns as they wait for Harry Himmelberg to re-sign with the AFL club. The key position player is a free agent at season's end and has been linked with moves to several clubs, including the Sydney Swans on the other side of the city. Kingsley is remaining calm about the situation, but would like it sorted soon.
You know, we're pretty comfortable with where it sits, but clearly he hasn't signed yet. So, you know, we'd like that to happen sooner rather than later. But I'm sure it'll play out. You know, he's playing some really good footy. You know, so we're really keen to keep him, as he knows.
And you're up to date with the latest ABC News. For more news anytime, you can download the ABC Listen app, or you can get more news on our website at abc.net.au/news. ABC News.
You're listening to ABC News Radio. Now it's time for All Things Considered from our broadcast partners at National Public Radio in the United States.
A court in Miami is answering the question of whether former President Donald Trump committed a crime by taking secret documents to Mar-a-Lago and obstructing government efforts to get them back. He has pleaded not guilty. A separate question, and one that might be harder to answer, is whether Trump's alleged actions hurt the United States. Glenn Gerstel was the general counsel of the NSA from 2015 to 2020, so he has a lot of experience with classified documents. Welcome back to All Things Considered.
Thanks. Delighted to be here.
When you read the full 37-count indictment, is there anything that specifically jumps out to you as particularly dangerous?
Well, it's a 49-page indictment, and that certainly wasn't required. You know, the Department of Justice doesn't need to specify all this level of detail, and that level of detail is exactly what jumped out at me as being quite scary. There was a list of some 31 documents rated at the top secret level in general, and some even more sensitive than that, that even in their brief description in the indictment made it clear that this was some of the nation's most sensitive secrets that were the subject of the indictment.
If a document that, for example, describes the military capabilities of an adversary or U.S. contingency planning for a war were disclosed to an adversary, like, what is the kind of harm that could do?
So the very definition of top secret is that it could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. That's why they're labeled top secret. So in your case, if there was a document that revealed our nuclear capabilities or those of an ally or even of a foreign adversary showing how much we know about them, you could imagine that that would cause a big change in the calculus in a possible war if we ever got into a shooting war. On our end, we might have to spend millions of dollars changing code systems, changing weapon systems, fixing vulnerabilities that we thought an adversary didn't know about, but now probably does. And so this could be unbelievably expensive and, more importantly, expose our troops to danger.
Is there a way to know whether that has happened, or does the intelligence community now just need to assume the worst case scenario and, change all the passwords or whatever the case may be?
So that's the problem. On one hand, they will take a worst case scenario, and as if you can imagine, if you lost your keys to your house overnight and it had your address on it, in the next morning, you'd probably want to change your locks. You wouldn't want to take the risk, even though you didn't know for sure that someone got hold of them. So the equivalent is true, although the stakes are much higher for national security. If we think the risk of compromise is pretty low and the cost to fix it is pretty high, we'll take that into account. And the flip side is true too, which is if we think there was indeed a risk of compromise and it involves the question of pulling a secret agent out of a foreign country for fear he or she is going to get caught, obviously we're going to have a very, very low tolerance of threshold for that.
And those seem like things the U.S. public may never be aware of, right?
Absolutely. A lot of this will be conducted in secret, and we don't want adversaries to know how much we know or don't know or what actions we're taking in response to this. I might add, this isn't theoretical. During Trump's presidency, 2 Chinese nationals were actually apprehended at Mar-a-Lago, wandering around. They were charged with unauthorized entry. One of them had on her possession 5 cell phone SIM cards, a bunch of cameras, 9 thumb drives, thousands of dollars of cash, and claimed she was just there for tourist reasons.
It's not how I travel as a tourist.
Exactly. So you can imagine that the thousands of dollars of cash might be used to bribe a gardener or a worker to get inside, et cetera, and the cameras for obvious reasons. She served 8 months in prison and was deported to China. And there was another Chinese national who was also apprehended. So this is not a theoretical issue at all.
When I look at the photos of the boxes and boxes of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, I wonder why this was on paper in the first place. If something that classified has to be put into print, why isn't it immediately shredded, incinerated after somebody's looked at it?
Well, of course it should be. So if it isn't needed right away, it's shredded. And when I worked at the NSA, we had, literally hundreds of classified documents sitting up on our desks every day. And at the end of the night, they were shredded and burned. Obviously, for presentation purposes, if you're going to a meeting, you're going to want a couple of documents to hand out. And famously, President Trump was interested in having pieces of paper in front of him, often with graphics. There are a number of anecdotes where he said at the end of classified meetings, "Can I keep this?" And the CIA officer or his briefer said, "Well, I'd rather not." And he said, "Well, I'm the president, I'm going to take it." And so it's a little hard to deal with that.
Ultimately, do you think even the intelligence community in secret will ever know for sure whether these documents and their disclosure caused harm to U.S. national security?
Unless we see actual evidence of a change in adversary behavior, they plug up a network, spies get liquidated, etc., we're not going to know for sure what the real consequences are. And even if one of those actions happened, we wouldn't know for sure that it was attributable to this particular compromise, if any. So at the end of the day, I suspect we're going to have to make some very costly decisions as to what to do based on a guess that some of these documents might well have been compromised, and we'll never know the answer.
Glenn Gerstel is former general counsel to the NSA. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
New York City says it's overwhelmed by migrants and asylum seekers, so officials have started sending people to nearby communities. But some of those localities have expressed hostility towards the new arrivals, and local nonprofits say they are stretched thin. One thing everyone seems to agree on is that there needs to be more guidance and support from the federal government. NPR's Jasmine Garst has this report.
Johnson Coronel hopes Albany, New York, is the end of the line. He's 26 years old. A few months ago, he left Venezuela, escaping government violence. He requested asylum at the Texas border.
Eso fue en Texas, en Bronxville. Se nos mandaron para San Antonio y de ahí...
2 shelters in Texas, then 4 days in Boston, then a shelter in New York City. He says they were 12 people per room. When he was told Albany would be less crowded, he immediately agreed to go. New York City recently started busing people upstate. Places like Albany, which is a sanctuary city, have agreed, but others have put up intense resistance.
Sanctuary cities, they're all sanctuary until they have to be sanctuary.
Peter Crummy is the town supervisor of Colony, 20 minutes away from Albany. He's sued Albany and New York City. Colony is not a sanctuary. On Memorial Day weekend, a bus with 24 people came from New York. Crummy says he was blindsided.
The federal government has created chaos in our country by not responding and making a plan for these folks.
As angry as he is with New York, he's infuriated at the lack of guidance from the president and Congress.
The solution lies at the feet of the federal government because immigration is decidedly a federal issue. It's not a town issue. Immigration's not a town issue or a village issue.
It's a sentiment that gets echoed throughout various towns in the area. Anthony Jerome lives in Rockland County, New York. They too recently received migrants and asylum seekers from New York City.
We can't afford it. We have too many people in the United States that are U.S. citizens, veterans of war, and so on, that need our help desperately.
Rockland County has a temporary restraining order to keep asylum seekers out. Jerome says he feels compassion for people asking for asylum in his area, but
nobody signed in for that. People come to the suburbs and for this, thinking they're going to have a better life and safer environment, because it's not only the fiscal problem, it's a safety issue. We don't know who these people are.
actually, these folks who have entered the U.S. recently as migrants or asylum seekers have been screened by immigration authorities and allowed to pursue their cases within the U.S. But Jerome says he doesn't trust it. Danny Rizarri says hostility towards immigrants in some of these towns is alarming. He's the chairman of Capital Latinos, an Albany nonprofit.
So we can greet them, we can clothe them, we can feed them to a degree, but then what happens to them once they had tried to assimilate into this local area that's not really friendly to them at all?
Throughout New York State, organizations like his have been assisting. And considering how they're powered by volunteers, the list of comprehensive services Capital Latinos offers is impressive. But Director Mickey Jimenez says she's seen a 70% increase in the number of people they serve in the last year.
We need funding. There is no way that we can continue to provide the level of services that we're providing. You know, we're blessed with the incredible volunteers that we have, but they're getting tired too.
This is the one thing everyone seems to agree on. There needs to be more guidance and help from the government. Irizarry, Capital Latinos board chairman, says barring that, there at least should be a conversation on the local level.
You know, we're all living downstream of a failure, an epic failure of Congress to do immigration reform, right? But there is a question that needs to be answered. What does it mean to be a sanctuary city? It's not just enough to put up a sign. It's more important that you have services in place.
A few miles south, Albany Victory Gardens provides help for migrants. President Mitchell Keys says he doesn't understand the outrage.
But there's a lot of jobs out here, and ain't nobody taking them. So if an immigrant comes to sign for a job, he's qualified, why not hire him?
But it's not that easy. Coronel, the 26-year-old Venezuelan who recently arrived, is here today. He tells me he's gone into some of those stores with the help wanted signs and inquired. He gets told no one speaks Spanish or asked for a work permit, which for an asylum seeker can take as much as 2 years to get. So for now, he's stuck again. No income, living in the shelter in a sanctuary city surrounded by towns where a lot of people don't want him.
Estamos cansados ya, tenemos que ya. Estamos aquí, o sea, no paramos.
We're tired, he says. One day we're here, the next day we're there. It's time to say this is it. We're staying here. This is home. Jasmine Garst, NPR News, New York.
Inflation watchdogs at the Federal Reserve met today, and for the first time in 15 months, they opted not to raise interest rates. Instead, they're taking a breather. That will give them time to see how previous rate hikes are affecting the economy. The decision comes a day after we learned that last month's inflation rate was the lowest in more than 2 years. But the Fed isn't yet ready to declare mission accomplished. It left the door wide open to additional rate hikes later this year. NPR's Scott Horsley joins us now to explain. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Elsa.
Hey, so the Fed has been raising interest rates pretty aggressively for more than a year now. Why did policymakers take a different tack today, you think?
Well, in part because they've moved so aggressively in the past. You know, they've already raised their benchmark rate by 5 full percentage points in just over a year. That's the sharpest increase since the early 1980s, back when Paul Volcker was fighting sky-high double-digit inflation. The impact of those earlier rate hikes is still making its way through the economy and hasn't really been fully felt yet. In addition, there's some lingering uncertainty about the fallout from recent turmoil in the banking system and how much that might amplify the rate hikes. So Fed Chairman Jerome Powell says even as he and his colleagues are battling inflation, they don't want to do more damage to the economy. So they're taking a moment to look around, see how things are going, and hopes that they don't go too far.
We're trying to get this right. And I think that the skip, I shouldn't call it a skip, the decision makes sense.
You hear the chairman backtrack there on the term skip. That would imply that this is a one-off and the central banks can go right back to raising interest rates at its next meeting. Powell says no decision's been made yet about what happens at that July meeting, although, as you said, the door of traditional rate hikes is certainly wide open.
Okay. Well, yesterday, we learned that the annual inflation rate in May was 4%. That's the lowest it's been since March of 2021, right? Which sounds like great news. Did that play at all into the Fed's decision?
You know, it was one more data point, but I don't think Fed policymakers took a whole lot of comfort from yesterday's inflation report. While the headline number, 4%, was pretty encouraging, some of the details were less so. You know, if you strip out the bouncy food and energy prices, so-called core inflation is still north of 5%. That's way above the Fed's target. And keep in mind, the Fed and other forecasters have underestimated the staying power of inflation in the past and gotten burned by that.
Forecasters, including Fed forecasters, have consistently thought that inflation was about to turn down and been wrong.
So Powell says they don't want to make that mistake again.
Right.
They're going to be very careful about taking their foot off the brake this time.
Okay. Well, were there hints today that the Fed may push the brakes harder by raising interest rates even higher in the months to come? What do you think?
There certainly were. Even though the Fed left interest rates unchanged today, policymakers predicted that more rate hikes will be needed to get prices under control. They're sounding more hawkish now than they were just a few months ago, and Powell says that's because they just haven't seen enough progress on inflation yet.
The committee is completely unified in the need to get inflation down to 2%, and will do whatever it takes to get it down to 2%. We understand that allowing inflation to get entrenched in the U.S. economy is the thing that we cannot allow to happen for the benefit of today's workers and families and businesses, but also for the future.
On average, Fed policymakers now think rates will have to go up another 0.5 percentage point by the end of this year. Financial markets seemed a little bit surprised by that tough talk. The Dow Jones Industrial Average tumbled more than 200 points.
Oof. That is NPR's Scott Horsley. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Film and TV writers are now in their 7th week on strike against the Hollywood studios with no signs of an imminent deal. They got shout-outs at Sunday night's Tony Awards, and on Monday, the country's largest labor union federation, the AFL-CIO, joined the writers in a rally outside Amazon Studios in New York City.
Can you hear us, Jeff Bezos?
As NPR's Mandalit Del Barco reports, the writers' movement is now uniting workers beyond Hollywood.
The AFL-CIO represents 12.5 million American workers, including postal workers, mine workers, and those in the entertainment industry. Liz Schuler leads the federation and led the charge at Monday's rally in New York City.
We're not going to take it anymore. We're here in force, not just the Writers Guild. We're here with the labor movement in this country standing strong in solidarity.
Schuler was also at a recent rally in downtown Los Angeles called the Union Strike Back. The protest included the Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA, which are both challenging the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers for new contracts. But in the sea of picket signs, there were also many behind-the-scenes Hollywood workers and Teamsters who've been turning their trucks away from picketed studios. Lindsay Doherty is a Teamsters boss.
So we've heard from the WGA, we've heard from SAG about these employers called the AMPTP, the Alliance, yeah, boo! Motion Picture and Television Producers, also known as the Evil Empire.
Like Hollywood, Los Angeles is a union town, and at the Union Strike Back rally was a cross-section of workers, including LA teachers who recently won a huge victory in their strike against the second-largest school district in the country. Marching alongside all of them was Graciela Gomez, a waitress at the Four Points Sheraton by the airport.
Ahorita todas las uniones estamos unidas para pelear fuertes con las grandes corporaciones y los billonarios.
Gomez says all the unions are united in fighting the big corporations and the billionaires. her restaurant and hotel workers union may go out on strike at the end of June for higher wages. So might 55,000 LA County workers in healthcare, social services, public safety, parks, and rec.
It's going to be a hot labor summer.
Duncan Crabtree Ireland is executive director of SAG-AFTRA, the union that represents Hollywood actors. It also represents broadcast journalists at NPR, though we're not covered under the TV and theatrical contract being negotiated now. In another example of solidarity across lines, many of the actors have already been walking their writers' picket lines, and they've authorized a strike against the studios they're negotiating with, as Crabtree Ireland explains.
Actors are workers just like everybody else here, and they are finding it impossible to maintain a sustainable living doing a job they love.
The actors and writers are living paycheck to paycheck, like so many others in the gig economy, says Chris Kaiser, co-chair of the WGA's negotiating committee.
I think it's part of a moment we're in right now. Labor feels its power for the first time in a long time. It's because the arguments that we're making ring true for labor, and maybe for Americans who aren't even part of unions, which is feeling of being meaningless, of being diminished by large corporations in a world that says we have the power and you have none. You don't get what you deserve. It's not possible like it used to be to earn a living and raise a family and do all the things that Americans had come to think was their right. That rings true for people.
Part of why the writer's strike resonates is because it can affect TV and movies we all watch, says Jonathan Handel, an entertainment attorney and journalist who's written about Hollywood labor.
The more important reason is Hollywood is a high-profile bellwether industry, and if workers are able to secure fair wages and job security with corporations, that sends a signal to other companies as well and helps affect the tone of the country.
Today, guilds and unions around the world, from Argentina to Ukraine, are rallying in solidarity with Hollywood writers. The president of the WGA, Meredith Steam, has already declared how writers will return the favor to all union workers.
When it's your turn, we will be there with you.
Mandalita Del Barco, NPR News, Hollywood.
Presidential campaigns cost a lot of money. Just ask the character Connor Roy from the show Succession.
I'm just wondering if I can hit you for like a little 100 mil.
A little 100 mil.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. But you have to quit your campaign.
Connor Roy there asking his father, billionaire Logan Roy, for just a little 100 mil for his campaign, which at the time was polling around 1%. That is actually not too far off from real life. Candidates need big donors, even if it means hitting up dad for cash. And with the number of candidates running in this year's GOP primary, our senior political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro tells us it could be the most expensive ever. Hey, Domenico.
Hey, Ari.
How much money are people expecting Republicans to spend on this primary, which is getting pretty crowded?
Yeah, I talked to the experts at Open Secrets, which tracks campaign finance, and they believe it could approach or surpass $1 billion just for this primary. That would be the first time for a GOP primary. It wouldn't be overall a record. You know, that belongs to the 2020 Democrats, because largely two billionaires who ran spent a ton of money. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, you might remember himself, spent more than $1 billion with very little to show for it.
It's still a lot of money. So how does that potential $1 billion figure break down?
Well, Republican candidates are expected to spend around $500 million, which is up from $400 million in 2020. Sarah Briner is the research director at Open Secrets and says that there's a big chunk of cash that's expected to be dropped too.
Really, the wild card here is how much we can expect to see in fundraising and spending by super PACs. And those are subject to a lot more fluctuation, because you could have one billionaire come in, drop $1 million, and that really changes the fundraising game.
Yeah, so you have candidates with deep pockets and super PACs with well-heeled big donors. And there's another structural factor here, Ari. The maximum amount people are allowed to give now has gone up. It went from $2,800 for primaries to $3,300 now. And that means people can max out at $6,600 when you include the general election.
A lot of those 6,600s may add up to $1 billion, I guess. Why did that increase happen?
It's interesting. Congress actually tied the max amount that people can give to inflation. And since inflation has been so high the last couple of years, it automatically jumped, which in turn means they can raise more money. It's amazing that Congress can index campaign giving to inflation, but can't do it for something like the minimum wage, which hasn't increased since 2009, and it's only $7.25.
Yeah, so where does all that money go?
Number one thing is ads, ads, ads. TV still gets the lion's share, but targeted ads on digital are playing a bigger and bigger part of campaigns. But how the money gets from campaigns to your radios and TV screens is notable. Here's Sarah Briner, the research director at Open Secrets again.
The biggest elephant in the room by far is that they spend money on advertising. And they do that by paying media consultants to buy that advertising for them. But over 60% of campaign fundraising, super PAC fundraising, goes to media firms. And so that's, far and away the biggest place that money goes.
The other biggie is staff, of course. Obviously, it takes a lot of people to run a professional presidential campaign.
Candidates must spend tons of time raising that money if running costs so much.
Yeah, they really do. Here's Sarah Briner again.
Theoretically, you're also supposed to be actually legislating or running your state or what have you. But I think it's a full-time job.
Yeah, for context, members of Congress in past years have been told to spend some 4 hours a day essentially dialing for dollars, unless they can get one of those big billionaire supporters who can fund a super PAC, which would take some of the pressure off of them having to spend all that time fundraising.
NPR's Domenico Montanaro, thanks.
You're welcome.
You're on ABC News Radio. I'm Dale Drinkwater. You were just listening to All Things Considered from our broadcast partners at National Public Radio in the United States. We're coming up to a 5-minute news bulletin, and after that, Glenn Bartholomew will join you and take you through the next few hours. Quick look at the markets, and the ASX 200 is up 0.26% to 7,180. And the Australian dollar is buying 67.9 US cents. Let's get a look at the weather around the capital cities now. Starting in Brisbane, where it's sunny today and 21 degrees. That's one below your top of 22 today, sunny. In Sydney as well, and 18 degrees. Canberra, partly cloudy and 13 degrees right now. Melbourne, a shower too, and currently 15. Hobart, mostly sunny, 14 degrees. Adelaide, a possible shower and 16 degrees. Perth, showers and 18 is the current temperature for you. Darwin, sunny and currently 31 degrees. As I mentioned, Glenn Bartholomew is up with you after the 5-minute news bulletin. Thank you for joining me on ABC News Radio this morning and throughout the afternoon. It's news time. ABC News with Jessica Hayes. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe says she made the wrong decision to have faith in the former coalition government's handling of an alleged incident of sexual assault in 2021. Political reporter Chanel Alkouri has more.
Lydia Thorpe yesterday used parliamentary privilege to accuse Liberal Senator David Van of sexually harassing and assaulting her. Senator Van denied the allegation but confirmed he moved offices after a complaint was made by Senator Thorpe. Speaking in the chamber today, Senator Thorpe says she spoke to senior Liberal leaders and was assured then Prime Minister Scott Morrison was informed of an alleged incident. She didn't mention any parliamentarian by name, but she told the Senate it was only until yesterday that she thought the Liberal Party had taken the matter seriously at the time.
To me, it was sexual assault, and the government at the time recognised it as such.
Senator Thorpe says she will not take the matter to police.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton says he's told Victorian Liberal Senator David Van he should no longer sit in the Liberal Party room. The announcement comes after Victorian Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe used her parliamentary privilege to accuse Senator Van of sexually harassing and assaulting her. She later withdrew the remarks to comply with Senate rules, but made further comments about her experience in the Senate today without naming him. Mr. Dutton says he's not making any judgment about Senator Thorpe's allegation, but has made the decision following further allegations against Senator Van being raised with him overnight and this morning. And the unemployment rate has fallen back to 3.6% as nearly 76,000 jobs were added to the economy last month. Business reporter Daniel Ziffer has more.
We already knew we had a labour shortage, that is, there are not enough workers to do the jobs that companies want done, and we are seeing that now with unemployment falling. We're looking at 3.6% being the unemployment rate, which means a very tight labour market, people really struggling to find workers and it being easier for people to get work. So the number of employed people in Australia reached 14 million.
Concerns are growing for a missing man off the Newcastle coast after an overnight search failed to find him and his boat. Madeline Lewis has the story.
The search began last night after 43-year-old Ashley McKellar didn't return home as planned. He was last seen earlier that morning at Bolton Point before launching his 4.8-metre aluminium boat on Lake Macquarie. The search has included a stretch of coastline more than 70 kilometres long and 40 kilometres out to sea. Marine Rescue Acting Zone Commander Steve Raymond.
We are concerned. We feel that you're most likely in the water at this stage. We certainly would have spotted a vessel within that area.
Several boats and helicopters from multiple agencies, including Pol Air and Defence, are involved in the search.
Victoria's domestic insurance building body says major builders will step in to help complete homes left unfinished by the collapse of Porter Davis. Jessie Thompson explains.
About 1,700 home building projects across Victoria and Queensland were left in limbo when the Melbourne-based builder liquidated in March. The Victorian Managed Insurance Authority says it's now appointed a group of volume builders to help bring unfinished homes to completion. The authority says Simmons Homes will provide quotes to affected home builders. Metricon Homes could also complete work for a further 300 to 500 homes. The VMIA says it's independently assessed the appointed builders to ensure they have capacity to complete the required work.
Overseas, and Japan's NTV is reporting the opposition is making final preparations to submit a no-confidence vote against the government of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, a move that could trigger the dissolution of Parliament and a snap election. Speculation that Mr Kishida himself would call an election intensified when his public approval ratings rose after he hosted the recent Group of Seven summit in his home base of Hiroshima. However, the government has since been criticised over the issue of a national identification card and a party thrown by his son at the Prime Minister's official residence. And the coastal regions of Pakistan and India are on high alert, with tens of thousands of people under evacuation orders ahead of a cyclone's expected landfall. The India Meteorological Department says the cyclone is packing sustained winds of up to 145 kilometres per hour. It's projected to make landfall in the Kutch district of India's Gujarat state later today. And you're up to date with the latest ABC News.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Good afternoon. Glenn Bartholomew coming to you from Gadigal Land, and making news, Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe gives more details under parliamentary privilege of an alleged assault in Parliament House. Reports of starvation emerging as a food shortage hits North Korea. And the New South Wales government announces a plan to boost public housing stocks across the state. Showers forecast for Melbourne and Perth, and maybe a shower. Looks like there's been a little in Adelaide. But we begin in Canberra. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe has used parliamentary privilege to allege she's been followed, aggressively propositioned and inappropriately touched while working at Parliament House. Senator Thorpe has not identified any person as responsible for that conduct, but it comes a day after she used parliamentary privilege to accuse Liberal Senator David Van of harassing and sexually assaulting her, something he denies. Here's some of what Senator Thorpe had to say in the Senate a little earlier today.
At the time, I was convinced that the government believed me. Their actions in immediately moving the person's office reassured me that they understood the seriousness of what I experienced. I did not make the incident public at the time because it was during the time Brittany Higgins had made her experience in this building public. I did not want to have anything taken away from Brittany's experience and her bravery in coming forward. I believe that was the right decision. My faith in the Liberal Party was not the right decision. Until yesterday, I thought they had taken this matter seriously. But then yesterday, I had to listen to a senator who has made me feel unsafe. speak on how important it is to keep women safe in Parliament. Silence is violence. And yesterday I could not stay silent. As someone who has knowingly made me feel unsafe, had the gall to stand up in front of Parliament and preach about protecting women. This was not an isolated incident, and there are others I could name who have inappropriately touched me, invaded my space and knowingly made me feel unsafe. I am disappointed by the reaction of the Senator. Instead of stepping up, taking accountability for the fact that he made me feel unsafe, he denied it. He asked his lawyers to send a letter, the same lawyers who represented Christian Porter. This type of behaviour makes it harder for other women to come forward. The standard we walk past is a standard we accept for ourselves too. We have a situation in Parliament where parliamentary staffers come to me to speak up about their own experiences of abuse rather than through the formal channels. This is not surprising when women, girls and gender diverse people seek help from authorities, especially black women, sister girls and brother boys. We are so often met with negligence, dismissal or further violence. Too often these conversations remain in closed spaces where the allegations are covered up and the silence on gendered violence is maintained. This only serves to uphold a system of abuse that avoids legal and political consequences, where the legal system is used to intimidate and silence, backed with a threat of money and time. Accountability in this country remains a theoretical academic pursuit, a nice talking point, a lovely aspiration. But I will not passively accept this. My testimony is one of action and resistance every day in this place. Violence against women, girls and gender diverse people is a product of gender inequality and systemic gender-based discrimination. On average, 1 woman a week is killed in this country. 1 out of every 5 women in Australia will be sexually assaulted or raped in their lifetime. And if you are not white, those statistics are even higher. Perpetrators are made by certain conditions. If we want change, we need to change those conditions. I will not pursue legal action against the Senator. I will not go to the police. This is my choice. But I will continue to speak out against the abuse and harassment that happens in this building. That is my choice. I want to focus on making this place safe for everyone. And at this moment, it is not a safe place for women. And I call on the government to immediately increase the number of security guards in the building and cameras in the corridors, and to consult women who work here on what measures can and should be taken. I send my love and solidarity to all women, girls and gender diverse people out there who experience the many different forms of sexual violence. And to all those survivors, we must continue to stand strong, stand together and never be silenced.
Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe speaking in the Senate a little earlier today. And just a short time ago, the opposition leader Peter Dutton had this to say, saying he's informed that Senator Van, the man who was at the centre of the accusations the Senator made yesterday, Liberal Senator David Van, will no longer sit in the Liberal Party room. Mr Dutton says he's not making any judgment about Senator Thorpe's allegation, but he made the decision following further allegations against Senator Van being raised with him overnight and this morning. Senator Van has just made a statement in the Senate, again denying the allegations, and we'll hear from him shortly. In the meantime, people in North Korea have told the BBC that food is so scarce that some have starved to death. Analysts say exclusive interviews gathered inside the world's most isolated state suggest the situation is the worst it's been since the 1990s. Those interviewed say the government sealed its borders in 2020, cutting off vital supplies. More from BBC's Jean McKenzie.
It's very hard to tell. Of course, we only communicated with 3 people, but we did our best to try and get what we felt was a representative snapshot. You know, we spoke to 3 different people from 3 different parts of the country of varying ages who were in different professions to try and give us as full a picture as we could. And, you know, we've spoken to somebody in the capital city, Pyongyang, those living across the border, but ultimately all we have is their stories to go on. But they do paint a picture, one that is, I guess, more troubling than what we imagined. The situation, the food situation in particular, is worse than I think people had realised. You know, we had heard reports that people perhaps were starving to death in North Korea, but the fact that we went and spoke to 3 people and 2 of them were able to say to us that their neighbours had starved to death, I think shows you how serious the situation is. And certainly people we've spoken to have said, look, this probably is more serious than we'd realised, and the food situation probably is the worst now than it's been since the famine in the late 1990s, which killed so many people and is widely regarded as the most tragic time in North Korean history.
And Jean, what has made the situation so severe right now?
By closing the border, Kim Jong-un not only stopped people from being able to go into the country, he quite staggeringly stopped trade. So he stopped freight trains even crossing the border. So that meant for a very long time, vital supplies of food and medicine couldn't cross into the country. And North Korea is a country that can't provide enough food for all of its people. So if you stop any food from entering, you are automatically going to end up with a shortfall. So that is one of the main reasons. The other is that if you look at how the economy works, there is this huge informal economy that's grown up over the years. So people essentially cross the river into China. They cross the border by sneaking out at night and sneaking back in with things to buy and sell. And they sell these things at local marketplaces. And that is actually how the majority of North Koreans make their money. It's thought that, you know, around 80% of North Koreans rely on this informal market trade. So by sealing the border and making it incredibly difficult for people to cross, it's also cut off this unofficial sort of smuggling trade, making it very hard for people to get what they need and very hard to make a living. So people are operating with much less money than they would normally have. There's much less food in the markets anyway. So therefore, you know, that's why the situation has kind of built up to what it is.
And Jean, tell us about your reporting. How did you gain access to these 3 voices?
So it's impossible to talk directly to people in North Korea. So what we had to do was work with an organization that has a network of sources inside the country. And these sources were able to find people who wanted to be interviewed. We then worked very closely with these sources to get the questions to people and then have them relay the answers. But it was a painstaking process. It's taken us many, many months because we had to drip feed the information. It was sent back in hundreds of different installments because it was too risky even to send one complete answer at a time. And we have taken so much care with this to make sure that we keep these people safe and that we do not reveal their identity. So taking our time and making sure we did it very slowly was part of that process.
The BBC's Jean McKenzie speaking there to Sumi Somaskanda. Let's have a look at what's making news elsewhere. It is 2:15 Eastern Time now, 2:45 for you in the centre, 12:15 in the west, and time for these news headlines. Federal opposition leader Peter Dutton says he's told Victorian Liberal Senator David Van he should no longer sit in the Liberal Party room. It comes after Victorian Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe used parliamentary privilege last night to accuse Senator Van of sexually harassing and assaulting her before making further comments about her experience in the Senate today. Senator Van denies the allegation. Mr Dutton says he's not making any judgments, but has taken the move following further allegations against Senator Van being raised with him. overnight and this morning. Australia's official unemployment rates dropped down to 3.6% despite the impact of aggressive interest rate rises on the economy. And police have charged 6 men with outsourcing methamphetamine from a global crime syndicate trying to traffic 6 tonnes of it into Australia. More than $1.5 billion worth of the highly addictive substance was found hidden in shipments of canola oil bottles travelling from Canada to Melbourne. Just some of the stories making news. Buying a home for many in New South Wales and across the country is out of reach for many of us, while rents are increasing at astronomical rates. Yesterday, federal crossbench MPs called for a citizens' assembly to be created. That would enable a jury of random members of the public to help shape housing policy. Well, now the New South Wales government has announced a policy to incentivise residential housing developers to include at least 15% affordable housing in their plans. Paul Scully is that state's planning minister.
We really have a housing crisis, not just in Sydney, but throughout New South Wales, and that spreads across all types of housing tenures. What the government is announcing today is that for this will be for the construction of more affordable housing, but as well as more housing generally. So housing developments that are over $75 million in capital investment value, which include a minimum of 15% affordable housing, will gain access to the state significant development pathway. So that means a more certain pathway for decisions, yes and no. Now, the other thing is that these developments will also be able to gain access to some floor space ratio bonuses and height bonuses. So that this is ultimately about delivering more affordable housing as well as more housing generally, and it will complement the other things that we're doing in terms of government land and rental reforms and building quality oversight as well.
And what can that kind of mean in real terms, though, in terms of, say, you've got a development of 100 units, would 15 of them be affordable, and are they to rent or buy?
Oftentimes they're to rent, so they're provided and run through community housing providers and who are often not-for-profit organisations who are providing that. The eligibility rules relate to income, so it's people on low to moderate incomes where they're not able to afford to live in particular areas. So we've got to make sure that there's an affordable option. So oftentimes you'll find this is key workers, healthcare workers, police, there can be teachers, hospitality workers who simply cannot afford to live in some of the suburbs where they're providing services to.
Will you have set units for them, for essential workers?
Yeah, so the affordable housing, they may be eligible depending on their income, because it's an income-based assessment, but they may be eligible for those affordable housing units. So,
but none specially reserved for them. You're not going to say 15% of the 15% have to be for nurses.
No, not
police
necessarily,
officers.
but nurses may be eligible under. It's an income test rather than an occupation test. So it's for those people who are not eligible for social housing because of their income, but their income doesn't allow them to live in a lot of simple market rent type properties.
Paul Scully is with us. Yes, it's not social housing, which is government provided. It's affordable housing. So I said, so to be 15, say it's 100 units, 15% of them would be affordable. But what do you mean in terms of the floor space? Would they be smaller than other ones? Would their ceiling be lower? What's it kind of look like?
No. The floor space ratio is the ratio of how much floor space there is on a particular block, and this is about making sure that the housing development remains feasible, financially feasible, because there's often a discount to market on the affordable housing properties itself. So you often have to add a few more units in order for the overall and the whole project to remain feasible, to get financing from banks and the like. And so this is being done this was proposed for the private sector builds, but it also adds to the work that the Minns government is doing with respect to our 30% target of social, affordable, universal housing on surplus government land, our work that we're doing in terms of rental reforms, and our work that we're doing in terms of the work of the Building Commission and establishing the New South Wales Building Commission over the end of the year, so that we've got well-built, well-designed suburbs with good builders doing the work.
Well, a couple of people are saying to me, "Well, hang on, how do we know they're going to be well built if you're fast tracking them? What's the insurance that they won't be kind of crappy?"
Yeah, so
to
it's it's a good thing. I mean, look, let's face it. Like, no one wants a poorly designed building nearby, and no one wants to buy into a poor quality building. That's why we're doing the work. David Chandler, the New South Wales Building Commissioner, has done some fantastic work in really cracking down on the construction industry. The government has proposed the New South Wales Building Commission to be established towards the end of the year that will expand that role, so that we're making sure that we're doing on the quality and on the design side that we expect good quality.
Yes, okay.
And we're putting in those places to drive.
Okay, a couple more questions. Are they going to be one bedroom or more? Will they be for families? Is that clear?
All of the above.
Right.
All of the above.
And how long will they be affordable? Because we have had this before, and the previous government had them, and then after 5 years they'd be sold off for a lot of money. So will this be in perpetuity?
So the current arrangements is for at least 15 years that they remain affordable housing. So this is continuing to have a pipeline of affordable housing into the future, so that you've always got that flow of more affordable housing along with more market and general housing coming into the system. In addition to the work that the government's doing with respect of housing on our own surplus government land, where we're setting that target of at least 30% social, affordable, and universal housing on that surplus government land, which the Premier's asked us all, every minister, to have a look at the departmental land holdings and agency land holdings to see what might be able to.
So 15 years as opposed to 5, but they don't stay in perpetuity.
Well, they can, but that's not necessarily required.
Well, it's probably unlikely because they're going to get a return in 15 years. They're not going to keep them for affordable rents.
Well, some developers may decide to transfer them to a community housing provider in perpetuity. It just depends on some of the financing arrangements and some of the feasibility of the build as to what individuals might do. What we're saying is we're not dictating what should be done beyond the minimum requirements. What we're saying is we want more affordable housing, and we want more housing generally into the system, because what's happened over the last few years simply hasn't worked. Otherwise, we would be in a much better position than we are today.
That is Paul Scully, the New South Wales Planning Minister, speaking there to the ABC's Sarah McDonald on their plan to make sure there's some affordable housing for people just trying to get a roof over their head. Time to talk Thursday sport, and Brittany Klein's here to keep us up to date. Thanks, Brittany.
Hi, Glenn. There are concerns the Socceroos' friendly match with world champions Argentina in China tonight will be used as propaganda. The federal opposition is warning the organisers' links to the Chinese Communist Party put the Socceroos at risk of being caught up in a propaganda push. Football Australia has told the ABC that the organisation's prime focus is on promoting the game of football and ensuring teams can perform at their best. Former Chinese diplomat and political commentator Han Yang says the match is a good thing, but concedes the event falling on President Xi Jinping's birthday may be seen as a gift.
He famously went to the English Premier League when he visited Britain, so he's a very famous soccer fan. So it is very possible that this event has something to do with a celebration of his birthday.
Olympic champion Kaylee McEwen has gone very close to breaking her own world record in winning the women's 100 metres backstroke on the second night of the Australian Swimming's World Championship trials in Melbourne. The 21-year-old set the third fastest time in history, falling just 0.05 of a second outside her current record time of 57.45. Veteran Cam McAvoy won the 50 metres butterfly. Isaac Cooper claimed victory in the men's 100-metre backstroke, and Abby Harkin won the women's 100-metre breaststroke. Kai Taylor, who is the son of Australian swimming great Hayley Lewis, won the men's 200-metre freestyle. In cricket, veteran Stuart Broad has edged out Mark Wood to be named England's third fast bowler in the first Ashes cricket test against Australia starting on Friday. Broad will join James Anderson and Ollie Robinson in England's pace attack, while captain Ben Stokes is also expected to bowl. Off-spinner Moeen Ali has been selected in England's 11 as the replacement for injured spinner Jack Leach. Meanwhile, 7 Australian golfers will tee off in the opening round of the men's US Open tonight. It's the first time in 75 years that the tournament is being played in Los Angeles. Australia's Jason Day says he's excited to be playing in the shadow of Hollywood.
It's unbelievable that the landscape and the way it looks in downtown, Beverly Hills and LA, that we have a course like this, which is unique. So I'm excited to get out there and see how what the course provides for us.
Back home in the NRL, St George Illawarra has appointed Shane Flanagan as head coach on a 3-year deal starting next year. The board voted unanimously in favour of the former Cronulla Sharks coach to take over from interim coach Ryan Carr, who stepped in after Anthony Griffin was sacked last month. Flanagan says the Sea Eagles will continue to have his full focus for the rest of this season, but he can't wait to get started back at the Dragons. The Dragons are currently last on the premiership ladder with 4 wins and 10 losses this season. To AFL and GWS Giants coach Adam Kingsley admits there are concerns as they wait for Harry Himmelberg to re-sign with the AFL club. The key position player is a free agent at season's end and has been linked to moving with several clubs, including the Sydney Swans. Kingsley is remaining calm about the situation, but says he would like it sorted soon.
We're pretty comfortable with where it sits, but clearly he hasn't signed yet. So, we'd like that to happen sooner rather than later. But I'm sure it'll play out. He's playing some really good footy. So we're really keen to keep him, as he knows.
And Glenn, that's the latest in ABC Sport.
Good on you, Brittany. Thank you. Hear from you in the next half an hour. Let's have a look at finance. The market up again by about 0.25%. That's 19 points to 7,180. And the Australian dollar getting close to 68 US cents. Of course, we had those unexpected employment figures and not going the way people thought. Another 76,000 jobs added. What does that mean for interest rates? Either way, the Australian dollar at 68 US cents now and firming a bit on all the other comparisons. Gold's going the other way, down about $8 US to 1,934. And the price of Brent crude, exactly 73 US dollars for a barrel. Time to check Thursday's weather. Starting with a look at Brisbane, another sunny day and pretty close to your 22-degree maximum. Sydney the same, sunny again and close to your 18-degree top temperature. It's a little cloudy in Canberra and sitting on 12, and there's some showers expected in Melbourne where it's 15. Also 15 in Hobart, but it's a mostly sunny day for you. There's been a little bit of a shower in Adelaide and it's 17 degrees as forecast. 18 in Perth, 19 predicted and some showers predicted too. Darwin enjoying a dry day, in fact sunny and 31 right now. Currently 2:30 Eastern Time. In the centre of the country, approaching 2 o'clock, and that is 12:30 for you in Western Australia.
ABC News with Jessica Hayes. Opposition leader Peter Dutton says he's told Victorian Liberal Senator David Van he should no longer sit in the Liberal Party room. The announcement comes after Victorian Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe used parliamentary privilege last night to accuse Senator Van